The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Redemption Springs, a frontier town where dust seemed to coat everything: buildings, horses, and the souls of those who called it home. The air hung heavy with heat and anticipation as a crowd gathered around a makeshift wooden platform erected in the town square. Most wore expressions of morbid curiosity. Some displayed open contempt. A few showed undisguised excitement. Sheriff Tanner adjusted his belt and nodded to the auctioneer, a thin man with a voice that carried far beyond his frame. "Next lot, gentlemen." Three women were pushed onto the platform, bound by iron shackles that clinked with each reluctant step. Unlike the other merchandise, horses, cattle farming equipment, these were human beings. Their buckskin garments, adorned with intricate beadwork and animal bone, stood in stark contrast to the cotton shirts and trousers of the townspeople. But it was their posture that truly set them apart: back straight, chins raised, eyes revealing no fear despite their dire circumstances. The oldest appeared to be in her 40s, with a prominent scar running down her right cheek. The second woman, powerfully built and fierce, scanned the crowd with undisguised disdain. The youngest, barely more than 20, kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, as if drawing strength from their silent presence. "Three squaws," the auctioneer announced, using the derogatory term without hesitation. "Captured from one of them savage tribes up north. Good for housework, farm work, whatever work you need done." His implication hung in the air, drawing snickers from several men in the crowd. "$50 for the lot," someone called out. "75 yam." The oldest woman's eyes continued moving across the crowd, steady and searching, until they locked with those of a man standing silently at the back. Ethan Blackwood had not come for the auction. The tall, weathered rancher with graying temples had simply been passing through town for supplies when the commotion drew his attention. Now he couldn't look away from that piercing gaze. Something about her eyes, dark as midnight, yet reflecting something ancient and knowing, stirred a long-buried memory. Her neck bore an ornament he couldn't quite make out from this distance, but it seemed familiar in a way that made his chest tighten. The bidding continued, reaching $100 when a new voice boomed across the square. 200. Clayton Reed, the wealthiest man in 3 counties, stepped forward. His tailored suit and gold watch chain marked him as different from the dusty ranchers and farmers. 200 for the young one only, he clarified with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The crowd murmured. The 3 women drew closer together almost imperceptibly. The auctioneer looked uncertain. "They're being sold as a group, Mr. Reed." "Then 300 for all 3. Reed's tone brooked no argument. The women's eyes remained impassive, but their shoulders tensed. The eldest's gaze briefly returned to Ethan before looking away. Without fully understanding why, Ethan moved forward through the crowd. Each step felt both foreign and inevitable. When he reached the front, he slowly removed the gold pocket watch from his vest. His father's watch, the last heirloom of the Blackwood family. He held it up, its polished surface catching the sunlight. "I'll buy them." The crowd fell silent, the only sound the distant howl of a prairie wind sweeping down the dusty street. "Mr. Blackwood." The auctioneer seemed confused by this unexpected bid from the normally reclusive rancher. "The watch is worth at least $500, Ethan said quietly. "I'm offering it for the 3 women." Reed turned, his face darkening as he recognized Ethan. "Well, if it isn't the hermit of Blackwood Ranch," he said with forced joviality. "Didn't know you had interest in such commodities." Ethan didn't respond to Reed. He kept his eyes on the auctioneer, who looked between the wealthy businessman and the rancher with evident discomfort. 550, Reed countered. "The watch," Ethan repeated, "and 200 in cash." He reached into his pocket and produced the money, nearly everything he had brought to town. Reed opened his mouth to bid again, then closed it, studying Ethan with narrowed eyes. After a moment, he shrugged elaborately. "Let him have them. I was merely being charitable, offering to take such savages off the town's hands." He turned away, but not before adding, "Your father would be disappointed, Blackwood." The barb struck its target, but Ethan's expression remained unchanged as he placed the watch and money in the auctioneer's hands. The transaction completed, he approached the platform where the 3 women stood, watching him with guarded expressions. "You're free to go," he told them, though he suspected they might not understand his words. "But if you want, you can come with me. I have a ranch, safe place." The eldest woman's eyes never left his face. When the sheriff came forward to remove their shackles, Ethan noticed what hung around her neck, a necklace adorned with squirrel tails, faded but unmistakable. His breath caught. 5 years ago, he had seen such ornaments before. Not in a marketplace, not in chains, but deep in the forest after the flood. The wagon bumped along the rutted trail leading to Blackwood Ranch, 10 miles outside of Redemption Springs. Ethan sat in front, handling the reins with practiced ease. The 3 women sat in the back, maintaining their dignified silence. Occasionally, he felt the eldest's eyes on him, studying, assessing. The landscape opened up as they left the forested areas near town, rolling hills, giving way to a wide valley where Blackwood Ranch sprawled across nearly 1,000 acres. The main house stood on a gentle rise, a 2-story structure of timber and stone that Ethan's father had built 30 years earlier. Below it sat a barn, stables, and several outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, bordered by cottonwoods, whose leaves shimmered silver in the afternoon light. As they approached, Ethan's mind drifted back to that day 5 years ago, when the world had turned upside down. The storm had come without warning. Summer thunderheads had gathered over the mountains and unleashed biblical rains for 3 days straight. The creek that usually provided life to the ranch had transformed into a raging torrent that devoured everything in its path. Ethan and his father had been moving the cattle to higher ground when one of the horses spooked, kicking Robert Blackwood in the ribs and knocking him unconscious. Ethan had hoisted his father onto his shoulders, fighting through the rising water toward the hill where the house stood. They had almost made it when the ground beneath Ethan's feet gave way. One moment he was staggering up the slope, his father's weight on his shoulders. The next, the world was water and chaos. The current had snatched him mid-stride, tearing his father from his grasp. What followed was a blur of mud branches and the groaning roar of water. Ethan had managed to grab onto a floating plank, the only thing between him and death. For hours, maybe days, the world became a sick dream of sun rain, wind, and silence. He'd passed out sometime on the second night, dehydrated, starving, bleeding from his leg, where a piece of barbed wire had dug deep. When he opened his eyes again, the forest canopy stared back. He had been lying in a hollow near a fire, his leg wrapped in woven bark and thick leaves, his body covered in a hide. He couldn't understand the words they spoke, but he felt their hands firm, practiced, not cruel. 3 figures had tended to him in shifts. One gathered herbs and crushed the roots. Another spoon-fed him broth from carved wood. The third stared at him often, quiet, thoughtful. But the memory that haunted him most was of the ornaments. They wore necklaces adorned with squirrel tails, just like the one the eldest woman now wore. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "This is it," he said, though he wasn't sure they understood. He climbed down and walked around to the back of the wagon, offering his hand to help them down. The women exchanged glances, then the eldest descended without taking his hand. The other 2 followed. Up close, Ethan could see details he'd missed before: the intricate tattoos on their forearms, the beads woven into the eldest's hair, the way the youngest's eyes darted everywhere, taking in every detail of the ranch. "You can stay in the cabin," Ethan said, pointing to a small but sturdy structure near the creek. "It was for the ranch hands before." He trailed off. He hadn't employed help since his father died. "It's yours now." The eldest woman's eyes followed his gesture, then returned to his face. Her expression remained unreadable, but she nodded once, a gesture so subtle he almost missed it. He led them to the cabin, which contained 4 simple beds, a hearth, a table with chairs, and basic provisions. "There's fresh water in the creek," he explained, pantomiming drinking. "Food here." He pointed to the shelves stocked with preserves and dried goods. "I'll bring more tomorrow." As they entered the cabin, he noticed the middle woman, the fierce one, examining every corner, every window, every possible exit. The youngest went straight to the hearth, kneeling beside it and running her hands over the cold stones. The eldest stood in the center, her eyes never leaving Ethan. Then deliberately, she touched the squirrel tail necklace at her throat, then pointed to him. A question hung in the air between them. "Yes," Ethan said softly, "I remember." Dawn broke over Blackwood Ranch in streaks of amber and gold. Ethan had slept poorly, his dreams filled with rushing water and shadowy figures. He rose early, as was his habit, and went about his morning chores, feeding the horses, checking the fences, tending his small vegetable garden. As he worked, he kept glancing toward the cabin by the creek. There was no sign of movement yet. He wondered if they had fled during the night, but somehow knew they hadn't. The ranch had grown quiet since his father's death. Once it had bustled with workers and activity cattle being moved, crops being harvested, horses being trained. Now Ethan maintained only what he could manage alone: a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, a few horses, including River, his faithful mare. He sold enough beef and produce to keep the ranch running, but the vast potential of Blackwood land lay largely dormant. Just as he finished his chores, he spotted movement near the cabin. The youngest woman had emerged and was kneeling by the creek, washing her face in the clear water. Her movements were graceful, almost reverent, as if performing a ritual rather than a simple task. Ethan approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. When she noticed him, she straightened, but didn't retreat. "Good morning," he said. She didn't respond verbally, but her eyes, intelligent and assessing, watched him carefully. After a moment, she bent down again and continued washing. "I'm going to bring some food," he told her, gesturing toward the main house and then mimicking eating. She nodded slightly, indicating she understood. As he turned to go, the cabin door opened and the eldest woman emerged. In the morning light, the scar on her cheek stood out starkly against her copper skin. She wore the same buckskin dress as yesterday, but had removed the iron cuffs that had bruised her wrists. Her eyes found Ethan immediately. He nodded in greeting, and to his surprise, she returned the gesture. Progress, he thought. When he returned with a basket of food, freshly baked bread, smoked venison, apples, and a jar of honey, he found all 3 women sitting outside the cabin. The middle one, the warrior, was sharpening a stick with a small stone, creating what looked like a crude spear. She paused her work to watch him approach, her eyes wary. "Food," Ethan said, placing the basket on the ground between them. "For you." The eldest woman reached forward and picked up an apple, accompanying it before taking a bite. The other 2 followed suit, though the warrior did so reluctantly. Ethan sat on a nearby stump, giving them space. "My name is Ethan," he said, touching his chest. "Ethan Blackwood." The eldest woman swallowed her bite of apple, then touched her own chest. "Nayeli." Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. She could speak. She pointed to the middle woman. Kiona, then to the youngest. Ayana. Nayeli, Ethan repeated, nodding. Kiona. Ayana. He smiled faintly. Good to meet you properly. Nayeli's expression remained serious, but something in her eyes softened slightly. She reached up and touched the squirrel tail necklace, then pointed to Ethan again more deliberately this time. Yes, he confirmed. I think you saved me. During the flood. 5 years ago. She nodded slowly, then spoke in her native tongue, a fluid, melodic language unlike anything Ethan had heard before. Kiona responded sharply, gesturing toward Ethan with evident suspicion. Nayeli replied calmly, and whatever she said seemed to placate Kiona, though the warrior continued to watch Ethan with narrowed eyes. You are safe here, Ethan told them, though he wasn't sure how much they understood. No one will harm you at Blackwood Ranch. Nayeli studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Safe, she repeated the word slightly accented, but clear. As Ethan stood to leave them to their meal, he noticed something on Nayeli's wrist, a faded tattoo, or marking that resembled the scar on his own arm, the one he'd received during the flood. She saw him looking and covered it quickly with her other hand. There was more to this strange reunion than he yet understood. 3 days passed in a similar fashion. Ethan brought food and necessities to the women, who gradually began to explore the ranch. Ayana, the youngest, showed particular interest in Ethan's garden, examining the plants with knowledgeable eyes. Kiona remained wary, but ventured further each day, often disappearing into the surrounding woods for hours before returning at dusk. Nayeli was harder to read. She watched everything with those ancient eyes, sometimes following Ethan, as he worked, observing his methods without comment. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her English was basic but understandable, clearly learned sometime in her past. On the fourth morning, Ethan found something on his porch, a small wooden carving shaped like a river fork. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each curve and line lovingly detailed. When he looked up, Nayeli stood at the bottom of the porch steps watching him. You made this? He asked. She nodded. River, she said, pointing to the carving. Where we found you. Ethan's throat tightened. Thank you, he said quietly. Nayeli climbed the steps, slowly stopping an arm's length away. You remember us? Not clearly, Ethan admitted. I was half dead, but I remember the necklaces. He gestured to the squirrel tail ornament she wore, and hands, caring for me. A song, I think. She nodded, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softening slightly. We found you, in water, almost dead. Why did you help me? He asked the question that had lingered in his mind for 5 years. Nayeli's gaze grew distant. All life's sacred, she said simply. Even white man life. The words carried no judgment, just a statement of her people's belief. My father, Ethan said hesitantly. Was he? Nayeli shook her head. Only you, in water. The confirmation of what he already knew, that his father had been lost to the flood, still stung even after 5 years. I'm sorry, she said, surprising him with her perception of his pain. Ethan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he recovered, he asked, Your people, where are they? Something flashed in Nayeli's eyes, pain, worry, determination. Lost, she said. We search. Lost, you mean separated from you, she nodded. Bad men came, gun sickness. We run. Sacred land not safe. In running, we separate. Then, she held up her wrists, mimicking shackles. You were captured, Ethan concluded, and sold. Yes, her gaze intensified. Others still free. We find them. It wasn't a question, but a statement of intent. They would find their people, with or without his help. I'll help you, Ethan found himself saying. If you want. Nayeli studied him as if searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded once. Good. As she turned to go, Ethan called after her. Nayeli, the scar on your wrist. It looks like mine. He rolled up his sleeve to show the jagged mark on his forearm, a souvenir from the flood. She glanced at his scar, then at her own wrist, where the marking lay partially hidden by a leather bracelet. Not scar, she said. Sign, saved by water, marked by earth. She gestured to the sky, then to the ground. Balance. Before he could ask more, she descended the steps and walked back toward the cabin, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. The following Sunday, Ethan hitched the wagon and prepared to drive into town for the weekly service. It had been his routine since childhood. His father had insisted on church attendance regardless of ranch work or weather. After his father's death, Ethan had continued the practice, finding comfort in the ritual, if not always in the message. More importantly, his friendship with Reverend Sullivan had become one of his few remaining connections to the community. As he climbed onto the wagon, he noticed Nayeli watching from near the cabin. I'm going to town, he called to her. Church, I'll be back by afternoon. She approached the wagon, her expression thoughtful. Church, she repeated. Man talked to Sky Father. Ethan smiled faintly at her description. Something like that. Nayeli glanced back at the cabin where Kiona and Ayana were preparing their morning meal. I come, she said unexpectedly. Ethan's eyebrows rose. To church, are you sure? She nodded firmly. Learn ways, learn words, better for tribe. He understood her logic knowledge of the white man's customs would help her people navigate this changing world. Still, he hesitated. The town, they may not be kind to you. Not first unkindness, she replied with quiet dignity. Won't be last. Ethan couldn't argue with that. He extended his hand to help her onto the wagon seat beside him. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted her grip, strong and sure. As they drove toward town, Ethan felt a growing unease. Redemption Springs was like many frontier towns, suspicious of outsiders, especially native ones. Bringing Nayeli to church would cause a stir. But perhaps that was necessary. Perhaps it was time to challenge the comfortable isolation he'd built around himself since his father's death. Reverend Sullivan is a good man, he told Nayeli as the town came into view. He'll treat you with respect. She nodded, her eyes already scanning the buildings and streets ahead. One good man, better than none, she said pragmatically. The small white church sat at the edge of town, its steeple reaching toward the cloudless sky. As Ethan guided the wagon into the yard, he could see other townsfolk, arriving families in their Sunday-best elders, leaning on canes, children fidgeting in uncomfortable clothes. Conversations halted as people noticed Ethan's companion. Whispers replaced greetings. Some openly stared, while others averted their eyes as if Nayeli's presence offended their sensibilities. Ethan helped her down from the wagon, acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. Ignore them, he said quietly. Always do, she replied, her head high, as they walked toward the church doors. At the entrance stood Reverend Sullivan, a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely white hair, despite being only in his 40s. He greeted each parishioner by name, a tradition he had maintained for the 15 years he had served Redemption Springs. Ethan, he said warmly when they approached, good to see you. His eyes moved to Nayeli with curiosity but no judgment. And who is your friend? Reverend, this is Nayeli, Ethan introduced. Nayeli, Reverend Sullivan. Welcome to our church, Sullivan said, offering his hand. Nayeli studied him briefly before accepting the handshake. Thank you, she said. If the Reverend was surprised by her English, he didn't show it. All are welcome in God's house, he said, gesturing them inside. As they entered, Ethan noticed Clayton Reed standing with a group of prominent citizens near the front pews. Reed's eyes narrowed when he spotted Nayeli, and he leaned over to whisper something to Sheriff Tanner, who frowned in their direction. Ethan guided Nayeli to a pew near the back where they would draw less attention. As they sat, he could feel the weight of stares upon them, some curious, some hostile. The wealthy man, Nayeli said quietly, nodding toward Reed. He wanted sisters for bad purpose. Ethan nodded grimly. Clayton Reed owns half the county, thinks he owns the people too. Men like him everywhere, she observed. Different clothes, same eyes. Before Ethan could respond, the service began. Reverend Sullivan took his place at the pulpit, his voice ringing clear through the small church. Today's sermon, he announced, is about the Good Samaritan. Ethan couldn't help but appreciate the appropriateness of the topic, the parable of a man helping a stranger from a different culture despite societal divisions. He wondered if Sullivan had chosen it deliberately upon seeing Nayeli. Throughout the service, Nayeli listened attentively, her expression thoughtful, as Sullivan spoke of compassion transcending cultural boundaries. When hymns were sung, she remained silent, but watched carefully, studying the ritual. After the final prayer, as people began to file out, Reed approached them, flanked by Sheriff Tanner and two other men Ethan recognized as town council members. Blackwood, Reed said, his voice falsely cordial. Bringing local color to our Sunday service now, are we? Ethan stood, positioning himself slightly in front of Nayeli. Ms. Nayeli wanted to attend church. Last I checked, Reverend Sullivan welcomes all to worship. Indeed I do, Sullivan said, joining them with a pleasant smile that didn't quite mask the steel beneath. Was there something you needed, Mr. Reed? Reed's smile tightened. Just ensuring our town's standards are maintained, Reverend. We've had trouble with savages before. The only savagery I've witnessed lately was at the auction block, Ethan said quietly. Human beings in chains doesn't strike me as particularly civilized. Reed's face darkened. Those women were prisoners, Blackwood. Their tribe has been raiding settlements up north. That's a lie, Nayeli said suddenly, her voice clear and steady. All eyes turned to her in surprise. My people peaceful. We run from fights, not start them. Reed recovered quickly from his shock at her speech. Well, it talks. He turned to the sheriff. Tanner, remind me again where these squaws were captured. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Traders brought them in, said they found them near Fort Bridger. Tribe unknown. Exactly, Reed said smoothly. Unknown, unaccounted for, potentially dangerous. He looked at Ethan. You've brought a threat into our community, Blackwood. The only threat I see is standing right in front of me, Ethan replied evenly. Tension crackled between them until Sullivan stepped forward. Gentlemen, this is God's house. Perhaps we could continue this discussion elsewhere. No need, Reed said, his eyes never leaving Ethan. I've made my point. The town council will be discussing this situation. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Blackwood, your property taxes are due next month. I'd hate to see you lose that ranch over an oversight. The threat was thinly veiled. As Reed's tax collector, as well as holding the mortgage on several surrounding properties, Reed had the power to make financial trouble for many in the county. After Reed and his entourage departed, Sullivan turned to Ethan and Nayeli with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. Reed wields considerable influence here, but he doesn't speak for everyone. Enough, though, Ethan said grimly. Sullivan nodded reluctantly. Perhaps, but Wright doesn't always side with majority. He focused on Nayeli. You speak English well. Learned as child, she explained. White missionary lived with tribe many seasons. Taught some of us. Fascinating, Sullivan said genuinely. I'd love to hear more about your people if you're willing to share. Maybe another time, Ethan interjected, noting the remaining parishioners who were watching them with undisguised curiosity. We should head back to the ranch. Sullivan nodded in understanding. Of course, but please both of you know that you're welcome here anytime. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, Ethan, be careful. Reed doesn't make idle threats. I know, Ethan replied, but neither do I. As they departed, Nayeli walked close to Ethan's side. The God-man is good, she observed. Few like him. Few indeed, Ethan agreed as they climbed back into the wagon. The return journey was silent, both lost in their own thoughts about the confrontation. As they neared the ranch, Nayeli finally spoke again. Reed man wants our land, she said. Sacred land. Has water that heals, plants that cure. He knows this. Ethan glanced at her. Is that why your people were forced to leave? He wanted your land. She nodded. Men came first with smiles, then with guns. We left sacred place to save lives, now scattered. Some caught like us, others hiding. And you need to find them, Ethan concluded. Yes, before Reed man does. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins. Then we better start looking. That evening, as twilight painted the hills in shades of purple and gold, Ethan sat on his porch cleaning his rifle. The encounter with Reed had left him uneasy. The businessman wasn't known for making threats he didn't intend to carry out. Movement caught his eye, Nayeli approaching from the cabin, a small bundle in her hands. She climbed the steps and sat beside him on the porch bench, without invitation. Her presence somehow both foreign and familiar. Sisters sleep, she said. Night comes. Good time for truth. Ethan set aside his rifle. Truth about what? She unwrapped the bundle, revealing several items, a small leather pouch, a carved wooden figure, and what appeared to be a crude map drawn on a piece of animal hide. Our journey, she explained, pointing to the map, from sacred land to here. Ethan studied the map. It showed mountains, rivers, and various symbols he didn't recognize. Nayeli pointed to a circle surrounded by wavy lines. Sacred water, healing place. Her finger moved to another location. Reed men here, digging, searching. Finally, she pointed to a third spot marked with a different symbol. Our people, hiding, or... She made a gesture that suggested captivity. You think Reed has captured more of your tribe? Ethan asked. Yes, looking for secret of sacred water. She looked at him intently. Water saved you. After flood. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? You were dying. We brought water from sacred place. It healed. The revelation stunned him. He had assumed his recovery was due to their herbal knowledge and care, not some mystical water source. That's why you helped me, he said slowly, to use this sacred water. Nayeli shook her head firmly. No, helped first because right thing. Water after because needed. She touched his arm where the scar lay beneath his sleeve. Left mark, sign of water spirit. Ethan glanced at his arm, then at her wrist where he had noticed the similar marking. And you have the same sign, all who drink sacred water marked, blessed, protected. She held his gaze. Connected. The implication hung between them in the gathering darkness. If what she said was true, he and Nayeli shared a bond that transcended their different worlds, a bond forged by this mysterious sacred water. Why are you telling me this now, he asked. Because tomorrow we start search, she replied matter-of-factly. Need truth between us, need trust. Ethan nodded slowly. Right, thank you for trusting me with this. She gathered the items back into the bundle, then hesitated. From within her dress, she withdrew a small object and held it out to him, a wooden carving of a hawk in flight. You gave to me, she said, after we saved you, before you left. Ethan took the carving, turning it over in his hands. The memory surfaced, hazily feverish hands, working a piece of wood by firelight, offering it as thanks to shadowy figures who had pulled him from death's embrace. I made this, he asked, though he knew the answer. Yes, said it was. She frowned, searching for the word. Family sign, Blackwood sign. The hawk, Ethan murmured. My father always said we were descended from hawks, sharp-eyed, patient hunters. He looked up at her. You kept it all this time. Nayeli nodded. To remember. The man from water. Man with good hands. She stood to leave, then paused. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we find our people. As she disappeared into the growing darkness, Ethan remained on the porch, the carved hawk clutched in his hand. The past and present had collided in ways he couldn't have imagined when he raised his father's watch at that auction. Whatever came next, he knew with certainty that his quiet, isolated life had ended the moment he recognized those squirrel tail necklaces. He was now bound to these women and their quest by something deeper than gratitude or obligation, a connection forged in floodwaters and sealed by a mysterious sacred spring. The night deepened around Blackwood Ranch, stars emerging like silent witnesses to the pact made between two people from different worlds. Tomorrow they would begin a journey that would either reunite a scattered tribe or lead them all into danger greater than they could imagine. Ethan placed the hawk carving on the porch railing, its wooden wings caught in eternal flight against the backdrop of the vast Montana sky. Like the hawk, he too was now suspended between worlds, between his past and a future that grew more uncertain with each passing moment. The nightmare came as it always did, water rushing his father's weight, slipping from his shoulders, darkness closing in. But this time something new emerged from the chaotic dreamscape. A song low and melodic in a language he didn't understand, hands steady and warm on his brow. The sensation of cool liquid on his lips, tasting of earth and sky, and something indefinable. Ethan jerked awake, sweat-soaked and gasping. A storm had blown in during the night, rain lashing against the windows of the farmhouse, wind howling through the eaves. For a moment he was disoriented, the boundary between the dream and reality blurred by the sounds of water all around him. A flash of lightning illuminated his bedroom, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the house to its foundations. Ethan rose, pulling on his trousers and shirt. Sleep would not return tonight. He made his way downstairs to the kitchen, intending to make coffee, when a movement outside the window caught his eye. A figure stood in the rain, face turned up to the storm-tossed sky. Nayeli. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed his coat and stepped out onto the porch. The rain immediately soaked through his clothing as he called out to her. Nayeli, what are you doing? Come inside. She turned slowly, her expression serene despite the deluge. Her hair hung in wet ropes around her face and her dress clung to her frame. She made no move to seek shelter. Storm speaks, she called back. Must listen. Ethan hurried down the steps and across the muddy yard. You'll catch your death out here, he insisted, reaching for her arm. She didn't resist as he led her toward the house, but her eyes remained on the churning clouds above. Water brings messages, she said, from ancestors, from spirits. On the porch, Ethan held the door open for her. Well, the message I'm getting is that we'll both be sick if we stay out here any longer. Once inside, he stoked the kitchen fire and put the coffee pot on to boil. Nayeli stood dripping on the wooden floor, suddenly looking uncertain in the confines of the house. You need dry clothes, Ethan said, disappearing upstairs. He returned with one of his shirts and a pair of trousers. These will be too big, but they're dry. You can change in there. He pointed to a small side room. Nayeli accepted the clothing with a nod and went to change. When she returned, the oversized garments gave her an almost childlike appearance that contrasted sharply with the wisdom in her eyes. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table. Do your people often stand in thunderstorms to hear messages? He asked, trying to keep his tone light. When signs were needed, she replied, warming her hands on the cup but not drinking. Storm came same night as flood that brought you to us. Storm comes again night before we search. Not accident. And what message did you receive? Her eyes met his, dark and fathomless. Danger ahead, but also truth. She hesitated. Your dream, the water, the song. You remembered? Ethan stiffened. How did you know what I dreamed? Same dream came to me, she said simply. Water connects us, since you drank from sacred spring. The idea should have seemed ridiculous, mystical water creating some psychic bond, but after everything that had happened, Ethan found he couldn't dismiss it entirely. If we're connected, he said slowly, then you know I'm committed to helping you find your people. Yes. She finally took a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. But also know your fear of failing, like with father. The observation struck too close to home. Ethan stood abruptly, moving to the window to watch the storm rage outside. I couldn't save him, he said after a long silence. I tried, but I wasn't strong enough. The current. Not your fault, Nayeli said quietly. Water takes what water wants, gives what water chooses. Is that supposed to comfort me? Ethan asked, harsher than he intended. Truth rarely comforts, she replied, but heals better than lies. He turned to look at her, this woman who had saved his life, and now sat in his kitchen to wearing his clothes, speaking wisdom that cut through the defenses he'd built over 5 years of solitude. Why did you really come here tonight, he asked. Nayeli set down her cup. To see if you were worthy of trust, if heart matches words. She stood approaching him with deliberate steps. Tomorrow we leave to find my people. May not return. Needed to know if Ethan Blackwood is a man who gives hawk carving or man who hides from world. The assessment was both direct and accurate. Since his father's death, Ethan had indeed hidden from the world, from relationships, from the possibility of failing someone else he cared about. And what have you decided? He asked, voice low. She reached out slowly and placed her hand over his heart. Man who gives hawk still here, she said. Under fear, under pain. Her eyes held his. Man who gives hawk is man we need tomorrow. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Ethan couldn't name. Then Nayeli stepped back, the connection broken. Storm passes soon, she said, glancing toward the window where the rain had indeed begun to lighten. Sisters will worry, must return. Ethan nodded, unable to find words. He walked her to the door, offering his coat, which she declined with a small shake of her head. Rain is blessing, she explained, washes away old, makes ready for new. As she stepped back into the gentle shower that had replaced the downpour, Ethan called after her. Nayeli, the song in my dream. Was it real? She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Healing song. For those between worlds. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Worked for you? Then she was gone, a shadow moving through the rain-washed night, leaving Ethan with questions he couldn't articulate and feelings he wasn't ready to examine. Tomorrow they would begin their search. For Nayeli's people, for the sacred water, for answers to mysteries that had begun 5 years ago in a flood that had taken his father but somehow given him a connection to a world beyond his understanding. Ethan closed the door against the night, but the scent of rain and pine lingered in the house, reminding him of the woman who had just departed and the journey that awaited with the dawn. Morning arrived clear and bright, the storm having cleansed the world and departed. Ethan was up before sunrise preparing supplies for the journey ahead. Food, water, blankets, ammunition for his rifle and pistol, he packed methodically. His mind focused on the practical aspects of the search rather than the uncertainties that lay ahead. As he worked, he heard hoofbeats approaching. Stepping onto the porch, rifle in hand, he relaxed when he recognized Reverend Sullivan on his aging mare. Bit early for a social call, Reverend, Ethan commented as Sullivan dismounted. Not a social call, Sullivan replied, his expression serious. May I come in? Inside, Ethan poured coffee for them both. Sullivan accepted the cup gratefully but didn't drink immediately. There's trouble brewing in town, he said without preamble. After church yesterday, Reed called a meeting of the town council. He's convinced them that your guests pose a threat to Redemption Springs. Ethan's jaw tightened. What kind of threat? He claims their tribe has been raiding settlements to the north. Says they're scouts gathering information for an attack. Sullivan shook his head. It's nonsense, of course, but Reed has a way of making people believe what serves his interests. And what are his interests in this case? Sullivan hesitated. I'm not certain, but rumors have been circulating about gold in the mountains north of here, where the native tribes have their territories. Not gold, Ethan said. Water, a sacred spring with healing properties. Sullivan's eyebrows rose. That's an unusual claim. I've seen its effects, Ethan replied, thinking of his miraculous recovery after the flood. And I believe Reed knows about it too. He's been forcing Nayeli's people from their land, capturing them, searching for this water source. The Reverend looked troubled. If that's true, it's even worse than I feared. Reed isn't just stirring up prejudice, he's engaged in outright persecution. Which is why we're leaving today, Ethan said. Nayeli believes some of her people are still free, hiding in the mountains. Others may be captives at one of Reed's mining operations. We're going to find them. That's dangerous, Ethan. Reed has men throughout the county, and if he suspects what you're doing, I don't have a choice, Ethan interrupted. These women saved my life 5 years ago. I owe them this. Sullivan studied him for a moment. This is about more than repaying a debt, isn't it? Ethan didn't answer directly. What else did you come to tell me, Reverend? Sullivan sighed. Reed has convinced Sheriff Tanner to send a patrol out here ostensibly to inspect your property for signs of collusion with hostile tribes. They'll likely arrive tomorrow. By which time we'll be gone, Ethan said grimly. Where will you go? Better you don't know. Sullivan nodded in understanding. Very well, but take this. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. A map of the Northern Territories more detailed than most. It might help in your search. Ethan accepted the map with surprise. Thank you. I've marked several settlements in known tribal areas, Sullivan continued, and he hesitated. A location where Reed has been conducting what he calls mining operations. It might be worth investigating. Why are you helping us, Reverend? Ethan asked. You're risking your position in the community. Sullivan's expression grew solemn. Because 20 years of preaching love and acceptance mean nothing if I stand by while injustice occurs before my eyes. He rose to leave. Be careful, Ethan, and may God go with you. After Sullivan departed, Ethan studied the map. The Reverend had indeed marked several locations, including a spot labeled simply Reed's Camp, near a river in the mountains to the north. He was still examining it when Nayeli, Kiona, and Ayana appeared, each carrying small bundles of possessions. Nayeli's eyes immediately went to the map in Ethan's hands. God-man brings help, she asked. Yes, Ethan confirmed. And warning, Reed's men will come here tomorrow. We need to leave today. Nayeli nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. Storm warned of this. We are ready. Kiona spoke rapidly in their native tongue, gesturing toward the north. Whatever she said caused Nayeli to frown. My sister says time short, Nayeli translated. Full moon in 3 days. Sacred time. If our people captured Reed, we'll force them to show sacred water. Why at full moon? Ethan asked. Water strongest then. Ayana spoke for the first time in Ethan's presence, her voice soft but clear. Spirits near, veil thin between worlds. Ethan nodded, accepting their belief without question. After his own experiences, who was he to doubt the spiritual practices of their people? Then we leave now, he decided. We'll take the horses, they'll be faster than the wagon over rough terrain. Within the hour, they were mounted and ready. Ethan on his mare River Nayeli on a sturdy gelding, Kiona and Ayana sharing a third horse. They carried only what was necessary, food, water, weapons, blankets, and the maps. As they rode away from Blackwood Ranch, Ethan felt a mixture of apprehension and strange exhilaration. For 5 years, he had lived in self-imposed isolation, his world shrinking to the boundaries of his property. Now he was riding into the wilderness on a quest that seemed half-mad, guided by three women, from a culture he barely understood, seeking a sacred water source that defied rational explanation. Yet somehow it felt right, as if the current that had nearly claimed his life 5 years ago had been carrying him toward this moment all along. They rode north, following game trails that kept them hidden from the main roads. Nayeli rode beside Ethan, occasionally consulting the map Sullivan had provided, while Kiona and Ayana followed the warrior, constantly scanning their surroundings for threats. By midday, they had left the settled areas behind and entered the true wilderness, a landscape of towering pines, rocky outcroppings, and hidden valleys that few white men had ever explored. Here Nayeli seemed to come alive, her posture straightening, her eyes brightening as if the land itself recognized and welcomed her. Home, she said simply, gesturing to the mountains that rose before them like ancient guardians, sacred land beyond ridge. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow near a small stream. As darkness fell, Ethan kept watch while the women conversed quietly in their language. Occasionally he caught Nayeli glancing his way, her expression unreadable in the firelight. Finally, as the others prepared for sleep, she approached and sat beside him at the edge of the camp. "Tomorrow we reach place of first signs," she said. "Must be cautious. Reed men everywhere in these mountains." "We'll be careful," Ethan assured her. "Sullivan's map shows several of Reed's operations in these hills. We'll avoid them." Nayeli was silent for a moment, staring into the darkness beyond their small fire. "When you find people," she said finally, "what then?" The question caught him off guard. He had been so focused on the search that he hadn't thought much about what would happen afterward. "I suppose that depends on them," he answered honestly, "and on you." She turned to look at him directly. "Not all will trust white man, even one who helps." "I understand that." "But all will respect man who gives hawk," she added. "Man saved by sacred water. Man marked by spirits." Her hand moved unconsciously to her own wrist, where the matching mark lay beneath her leather bracelet. "I'm just a rancher, Nayeli," Ethan said quietly. "Not some chosen one from your legends." A small smile touched her lips. "Legends not always about heroes who know they are heroes," she replied. "Sometimes about ordinary people who do extraordinary things because they must." Before Ethan could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their camp. Instantly, Kiona was on her feet, a crude spear in hand. Ethan reached for his rifle, scanning the shadows. For several tense moments, they waited in silence. Then a deer stepped into the edge of the firelight, regarded them with liquid eyes, and bounded away into the night. The tension broke, but something had changed. The wilderness around them suddenly seemed alive with hidden presences, watching, waiting. "Not alone," Nayeli murmured, her eyes on the spot where the deer had appeared. "Never alone in sacred lands." As Ethan took the first watch, and the others settled to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed some invisible boundary. They were now in territory where different rules applied, where the rational world he knew began to blur with the spiritual world Nayeli and her sisters inhabited. And somewhere ahead, beyond the next ridge or the next valley, lay answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask, until a squirrel tail necklace brought the past rushing back into his present. Dawn arrived in hushed tones of pink and gold mist, clinging to the valleys like spirits reluctant to depart the mortal realm. Ethan woke to find Ayana already up, kneeling by the dying embers of their fire, her lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. When she noticed him watching, she offered a slight nod before returning to her ritual. Nayeli and Kiona emerged from the small shelter they had constructed the previous night, their movements fluid and purposeful. Without discussion, they began breaking camp with practiced efficiency. "We must reach the marker before midday," Nayeli explained as they mounted their horses. "Land remembers footsteps. We'll guide if we listen." They rode in silence through forests that grew denser and more primeval with each passing mile. Massive pines towered overhead, their branches filtering the morning light into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Occasionally, Nayeli would halt, examining a bent twig or mark on a tree that Ethan would have overlooked completely. "Your people left signs," he observed after the third such stop. "Always," she confirmed, "for those who know how to see." Around mid-morning, they reached a narrow valley where a creek bubbled over smooth stones. Nayeli raised her hand, signaling a halt. "Close now," she said, dismounting. "Must go on foot. Horses make too much noise." They secured the animals in a sheltered grove and continued on foot, with Kiona now taking the lead. The warrior woman moved like a shadow through the underbrush, her senses clearly attuned to their surroundings, in ways Ethan could only marvel at. After a half hour of careful progress, they reached a small clearing where a weathered tree stump stood. Protruding from the stump was an arrangement unlike anything Ethan had ever seen: bones, feathers, and squirrel tails woven together in a spiral pattern, topped with a small carved stone. The three sisters approached the marker with evident reverence. Ayana touched it gently, her eyes closing as if receiving some silent message. Kiona circled it, examining the ground nearby with intense focus. What is it? Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Sign of life, Nayeli explained. Tells us people still free, still following old ways. Kiona suddenly called out in their native tongue, gesturing toward the base of the stump. The others hurried over, and Ethan followed, watching as they carefully dug into the soft earth beneath the marker. From the shallow hole, Ayana withdrew a small oilskin packet. With delicate fingers, she unwrapped it to reveal a folded piece of paper, a letter written in a neat, educated hand. English words, Nayeli said, handing it to Ethan. You read. Ethan unfolded the paper, surprised to find a proper letter hidden in this wilderness shrine. To whom it may concern. My name is Daniel Wilson, formerly a missionary with the Northern Territories Christian Mission. For the past 10 years, I have lived among the people known to themselves as the Otaka'anuto Waterkeepers. I write this in desperate hope that it reaches those who might help. Reed Mining Company has established operations throughout these mountains, but their true purpose is not gold. They seek the sacred spring the Otaka'anuto have protected for generations. Many tribe members have been captured and forced to work in Reed's camp by the western fork of the Blackwater River. Others, including their spiritual leader, are being held separately and pressured to reveal the spring's location. I believe Reed plans to exploit the spring's healing properties during the upcoming full moon ceremony, when its powers are said to be strongest. If you find this message and wish to help, proceed with extreme caution. Reed's men are numerous and well-armed. I remain at the camp, posing as an interpreter, doing what little I can to ease the suffering of my adopted people. May God guide your steps if you choose to intervene. Daniel Wilson, June 15, 1873. Ethan looked up from the letter to find all three women watching him intently. Reed has your people, he confirmed grimly, at a camp by the Blackwater River, and he's holding your leader, your mother, somewhere else, trying to force her to reveal the spring's location. Nayeli nodded, her expression hardening. Makawi, our mother, tribe's heart. The letter mentions a full moon ceremony, Ethan continued. Is that what you were referring to yesterday? Yes, Ayana spoke up. Time when veil thins, when sacred water speaks most clearly, when healing strongest. And when its location is most vulnerable to discovery, Ethan concluded. If Reed forces your mother to perform the ceremony, he could find the spring. Would be great dishonor, Nayeli said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Sacred water not for selling, not for using selfishly. Kiona spoke rapidly in their language, her gestures becoming increasingly agitated. Nayeli listened, then turned to Ethan. Sister says we must split, she translated. She and Ayana go to main camp where many tribe members held. You and I find mother. Ethan frowned. Is that wise, separating our strength? No choice, Nayeli replied firmly. Two groups move faster than one. Time short. Moon rises full tomorrow night. Though he had reservations, Ethan recognized the logic. They needed to locate both groups of prisoners quickly if they were to prevent Reed from discovering the spring. Where would Reed keep your mother? He asked. Nayeli exchanged words with her sisters, then pointed to Sullivan's map. Here, she said, indicating a spot near a lake high in the mountains. Old trading post. Now Reed Place. Ethan studied the map. The location was remote, accessible only by a single trail that wound through treacherous mountain passes. A perfect place to hold important prisoners away from prying eyes. And the main camp, he asked. Kiona pointed to another location on the map, the spot Sullivan had marked as Reed's camp, near the Blackwater River. We'll need a plan for both locations, Ethan said, thinking aloud, and a way to communicate if one group finds trouble. From her pouch, Ayana withdrew a small bone whistle. Call of Hawk, she explained, demonstrating a brief series of notes. Our people will know. Reed men will think just bird. They spent the next hour planning their approach to both locations. The main camp would be more heavily guarded, but also more chaotic, a mining operation with dozens of workers and guards. The trading post would have fewer guards but tighter security around the high-value prisoners. Kiona and Ayana will scout the main camp, Ethan summarized. Look for weaknesses, count the guards, find where the prisoners are kept. Nayeli and I will do the same at the trading post. Neither group attempts a rescue until we reunite tomorrow at midday here. He pointed to a location between the two camps. The sisters nodded in agreement. After a brief ceremony that Ethan didn't understand involving the marker and what appeared to be prayers in their native tongue, they prepared to separate. As Kiona and Ayana gathered their sparse belongings, Nayeli spoke to them intensely, clasping forearms, with each in what was clearly a significant gesture. Ayana embraced her eldest sister, while Kiona simply nodded, her expression stoic, but her eyes betraying concern. They go with strength, Nayeli said as her sisters disappeared into the forest. We go with wisdom. Ethan shouldered his rifle. Let's hope we find both. The journey to the old trading post took them higher into the mountains, where the air grew thin and the forest gave way to rocky slopes and alpine meadows. They left two of the horses behind with Kiona and Ayana, taking only Ethan's mare River, as they would need to travel light and quiet. By late afternoon, they had reached a ridge overlooking a small plateau, where the trading post stood, a cluster of log buildings surrounded by a wooden palisade. Even from this distance, Ethan could see armed men patrolling the walls. More guards than I expected, he murmured as they observed from the shelter of a granite outcropping. At least 10 visible. Nayeli's eyes scanned the compound with fierce intensity. Mother there, she said with certainty, can feel her presence. Ethan had learned not to dismiss Nayeli's intuitions. Can you tell where they're keeping her? She pointed to the largest building in the center of the compound. There, where light burns. Indeed, despite the daylight, a lamp glowed in one window of the central building. Someone was being kept inside important enough to warrant extra attention. We need to get closer, Ethan decided. See if there's a way in that doesn't involve fighting 10 armed men. They circled the plateau, carefully staying under cover of the scattered pines and boulders that dotted the mountainside. As they moved, Ethan noticed Nayeli becoming increasingly tense, her movements more deliberate, her breathing controlled as if she were in pain. What's wrong? He asked when they paused behind a fallen tree. This place, she replied, her voice tight, was sacred ground once. Now, she pressed her hand against the earth. Land screams, too much pain, too much taking without giving back. Ethan didn't fully understand, but he could see her distress was genuine. We won't stay longer than necessary, he promised. As dusk approached, they found a vantage point closer to the compound, a rocky shelf that offered both concealment and a clear view of the palisade gate. From here, they could observe the guards changing shifts and the patterns of movement within the compound. 6 guards on the walls, Ethan counted, 4 more patrolling inside, and likely others we can't see inside the buildings. Nayeli pointed to a small structure near the back wall. That building. No windows. Strong door. Place for keeping weapons, maybe. Good observation, Ethan agreed. If we could create a diversion there. Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of riders at the compound gate, 4 men on horseback led by a figure Ethan recognized with a jolt of surprise. Reverend Sullivan, he breathed disbelieving. Nayeli tensed beside him. God, man, hear why. Ethan watched as Sullivan and the other riders were admitted to the compound. I don't know, but I don't like it. The Reverend had seemed genuinely concerned for their welfare, had provided the map they now used. Had it all been a ruse? Was Sullivan working with Reed, leading them into a trap? Wait, Nayeli said, suddenly gripping Ethan's arm. Not what seems. Look. Ethan focused again on the compound. Sullivan was being escorted, not as a guest, but as a prisoner, his hands bound before him, his expression grim as a guard prodded him forward with a rifle. They've captured him, Ethan realized. But why bring him here? Before Nayeli could respond, another figure emerged from the main building. Clayton Reed himself, dressed impeccably, despite the remote location. He strode towards Sullivan, his posture radiating smug satisfaction. Though they were too far away to hear the exchange, Reed's gestures were animated, pointing repeatedly toward the mountains beyond the compound, then back at Sullivan. The Reverend stood straight-backed, saying little in response to what appeared to be accusations or demands. Finally, Reed signaled to his men. Sullivan was dragged toward the main building and inside, where presumably Nayeli's mother was also being held. This changes things, Ethan said once Reed had returned to his own quarters. Sullivan's presence could help or hinder us, but either way, we now have 2 people to rescue. Nayeli studied the compound for several long moments. Night comes, she observed, as shadows lengthened across the plateau. With darkness, different eyes see better. They retreated to a more sheltered position to wait for full darkness, sharing dried meat and the last of their water in silence. As the first stars appeared overhead, Ethan noticed Nayeli staring at the sliver of moon visible above the eastern peaks. Tomorrow it will be full, she said softly. Time of power, time of danger. Do you really believe the spring's powers are stronger during the full moon? Ethan asked. She turned to look at him, her expression suggesting the question was naive. You drank sacred water. You live when should have died. You dream my dreams. Still you doubt. Put that way, his skepticism did seem unfounded. I'm trying to understand, he said simply. Nayeli's expression softened. Understanding comes from heart, not head, she said, touching his chest lightly. Sacred water opens path between worlds. Moon pulls water. Ocean river, blood spirit. When moon fullest path, widest. Her explanation carried a poetic logic that resonated with Ethan despite his practical nature. Perhaps there were indeed forces in this world that couldn't be measured or explained by conventional wisdom. If Reed forces your mother to reveal the spring during tomorrow's full moon, he asked, what happens? Nayeli's face grew somber. Spring loses power if revealed wrongly. Spirits retreat. Healing fades. Her hand moved unconsciously to her wrist where the marking lay. Those connected to spring feel pain. Some die. The implications stun Ethan. You would die, and your sisters, and... He didn't finish the thought, but his hand went to his own arm, where his matching scar tingled as if in response. Perhaps, she admitted, connections strong in some, weaker in others. But all who drank would suffer. Ethan looked toward the compound where armed men guarded a spiritual leader whose forced cooperation could bring death to her people and possibly to Ethan himself. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. We need to get inside, he said with newfound determination. Tonight. Nayeli nodded, her eyes reflecting starlight and resolve. Yes, time for watching ends. Time for action begins. Full darkness brought a change to the compound. The number of visible guards decreased as men sought shelter from the mountain chill. Lights burned in only 3 buildings, now Reed's quarters, the main building, where Sullivan and presumably McAwee were held, and a smaller structure that appeared to be a guardhouse. Ethan and Nayeli had circled to the rear of the compound, where the palisade wall backed against a steep slope. Here the builders had been less careful, assuming the terrain itself provided adequate defense. "I can climb it," Nayeli whispered, eyeing the rough logs. "Then open gate for you." Ethan shook his head. "Too risky. We go together or not at all." After studying the wall carefully, they found what they needed: a section where the logs had been poorly set, leaving gaps just large enough for handholds. With Ethan providing a boost, Nayeli climbed silently up the 10-foot wall, then reached down to help him follow. They crouched atop the palisade, surveying the compound from their new vantage point. A single guard patrolled this section, moving in a predictable pattern between the rear wall and the main building. "Wait for him to pass," Ethan whispered. "Then we drop down and make for the shadows beside the storehouse." Nayeli nodded, her body tensed like a cat preparing to pounce. When the guard turned the corner of the main building, they descended quickly and silently into the compound, immediately pressing themselves against the dark side of the nearest structure. Moving from shadow to shadow, they worked their way toward the central building. Twice they froze as guards passed nearby, but the men were clearly bored with their duty, more focused on staying warm than maintaining vigilance. Finally, they reached the main building, a 2-story structure that had once been the trading post's primary storehouse. Light glowed from several windows, and voices could be heard from within. "Side door," Nayeli indicated, pointing to a small entrance, partially hidden by stacked crates. "Less watched." They crept toward it, but as they reached the door, it suddenly opened. Ethan pulled Nayeli into the shadows as a guard emerged, lighting a cigarette. The man stood mere feet from them, the cherry glow of his tobacco illuminating his weathered face in the darkness. Ethan held his breath, acutely aware of Nayeli's warmth pressed against him in the narrow space between crates. The guard finished his smoke, dropped the butt, and ground it under his heel before re-entering the building. "Now," Ethan whispered, once the door had closed. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit hallway. Doors lined both sides, and at the far end, voices could be heard in what appeared to be the main room. Moving silently, they began checking each door, looking for prisoners. The first 2 rooms were empty storage areas. The third contained sleeping guards, 4 men in bunks, who thankfully didn't stir as Ethan eased the door closed again. The 4th door was locked. Nayeli pressed her ear to the wood, then nodded. "Someone inside," she whispered. Breathing. Ethan examined the lock, a simple bolt mechanism that would be noisy to force. "We need a key," he murmured. As if in answer to his words, footsteps approached from the main room. A guard appeared at the end of the hallway, keys jangling at his belt, as he walked toward the very door they were attempting to access. They had nowhere to hide in the narrow corridor. Ethan made a split-second decision, pushing Nayeli into the shadows behind the door and stepping forward to meet the guard. The man spotted him immediately. "Hey, who the hell?" Ethan didn't let him finish. He closed the distance in 2 strides and delivered a punch that connected solidly with the guard's jaw. The man staggered but didn't fall, reaching for a sidearm. Before he could draw, Nayeli emerged from the shadows and struck him from behind with a piece of firewood she'd grabbed from a nearby stack. The guard crumpled unconscious. Quietly, Ethan cautioned as they dragged the man into an empty room. He took the keys and returned to the locked door, trying several before finding one that turned the bolt. The door swung open to reveal a small room furnished only with a cot and chamber pot. On the cot sat Reverend Sullivan, his hands still bound, but his expression changing from fear to shock as he recognized his visitors. "Ethan," he whispered incredulously, "what in God's name are you doing here?" "Rescuing you, apparently," Ethan replied, cutting Sullivan's bonds with his knife. "Though I'd appreciate knowing why you need rescuing in the first place." Sullivan rubbed his wrist where the ropes had chafed. "Reed discovered I'd helped you. Someone saw me giving you the map." His eyes moved to Nayeli. He was furious. Said I'd interfered with his divine right to the spring. "Divine right," Ethan repeated. "He's convinced himself the spring is a gift from God meant for him to exploit," Sullivan explained bitterly. "He plans to bottle and sell its water as a miracle cure. Thousands of dollars per bottle." "Where is my mother?" Nayeli interrupted, her focus unwavering. Sullivan's expression grew grave. "Upstairs. Reed's been questioning her for days, trying to force her to reveal the spring's location." He hesitated. "She hasn't broken, but she's weak. They've given her little food or water." Nayeli's eyes flashed with anger. "We go now." "Wait," Sullivan said urgently. "There's more you need to know. Reed isn't working alone. He has a partner, someone with connections to the territorial government." "Who?" Ethan asked. Sullivan looked away, shame evident in his posture. "My brother Thomas Sullivan. He's a federal land commissioner." The revelation stunned Ethan. "Your brother, is he here?" "Expected tomorrow," Sullivan confirmed. "For the full moon. Reed believes the old woman will be more cooperative when faced with official government authority." Nayeli had already moved to the door, her patience clearly exhausted. "Talk later. Free mother now." Sullivan nodded. "She's in the room at the end of the upstairs hall. Usually 2 guards at the door." "And Reed?" Ethan asked. "Separate building, his quarters." Ethan considered their options. "We need a distraction, something to draw the guards away from McCoy's room." Sullivan thought for a moment, then said, "The storeroom at the back contains blasting powder for the mining operations. A small explosion there would certainly draw attention." "Can you create such a distraction?" Ethan asked. Sullivan nodded grimly. "I was an artillery officer before I found my calling. I can manage a controlled explosion." "Good. When you hear it, Nayeli and I will move upstairs to free her mother." They left Sullivan to prepare the diversion and continued down the hallway toward the stairs, keeping to the shadows. Voices drifted from the main room, men playing cards complaining about the cold, unaware of the intruders in their midst. At the foot of the stairs, Ethan paused. "Once we start this, there's no turning back," he whispered to Nayeli. "Are you ready?" Her eyes met his in the dim light, fierce and determined. "Been ready 5 winters," she replied. "Since day we pulled you from water." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words, a connection forged through shared purpose in the mysterious bond of the sacred spring. Ethan found himself reaching for her hand, and she clasped his briefly, her grip strong and warm. "Then let's finish what fate started," he said softly. They positioned themselves at the bottom of the stairs, weapons ready, Ethan with his pistol, Nayeli with a knife she'd taken from the unconscious guard. Minutes passed in tense silence as they waited for Sullivan's distraction. When it came, it exceeded expectations. A tremendous boom shook the building, followed by shouts of alarm and the sound of running feet. Men poured from the main room, rushing toward the source of the explosion without sparing a glance for the stairway. "Now!" Ethan hissed, and they raced up the stairs. The upper floor was dimly lit by a single oil lamp at the end of a narrow corridor. 2 guards stood outside the last door, looking confused and alarmed by the commotion below, but maintaining their post. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired twice, hitting one guard in the leg and the other in the shoulder wounds designed to incapacitate without killing. The men went down with cries of pain, their own weapons unfired. Nayeli rushed forward, snatching keys from one of the fallen guards and unlocking the door while Ethan kept watch on the stairway. "Mother!" Nayeli's voice broke with emotion as she entered the room. Ethan glanced inside to see an elderly woman seated on a simple bed, her gray hair in 2 long braids, her face lined with age and hardship, but her eyes so like Nayeli's, bright with intelligence and inner strength, despite her weakened state. Makawi spoke rapidly to her daughter in their native tongue. Whatever she said caused Nayeli's expression to shift from joy to urgent concern. "We must hurry," Nayeli told Ethan. "Reed knows location of spring. Forced from one of our elders yesterday, plans to perform ceremony himself tomorrow night." This changed everything. Their plan had been based on preventing Reed from discovering the spring's location, but if he already knew, can he actually perform the ceremony? Ethan asked. "Without your mother?" "No," Nayeli replied as she helped Makawi to her feet. "But can desecrate sacred place, can destroy connection between worlds." Shouts from below indicated the guards had discovered their unconscious comrade and Sullivan's empty cell. Their time was running out. "We need to go," Ethan urged. "Down the back stairs, if possible." Nayeli spoke quickly to her mother, who nodded and pointed toward a window at the end of the hall. She spoke again, and Nayeli translated. "Says rope from Trader Days still in storage space under roof. Can use to climb down." Ethan kept watch while Nayeli helped her mother to the window and then climbed into the small attic space above. She returned moments later with a coil of sturdy rope, which they quickly secured to a roof beam. "You first," Ethan told Makawi, helping the elderly woman onto the windowsill. Despite her weakened condition, Makawi handled the rope with surprising agility, clearly no stranger to physical challenges. Nayeli followed, descending quickly to help her mother on the ground below. Ethan was about to follow when the stairway door burst open. 2 guards appeared, weapons raised. Without thinking, Ethan fired, hitting the foremost man in the shoulder. As the second guard took aim, Ethan dived through the window, gripping the rope with one hand while bullets splintered the wood around him. He slid down faster than intended, rope burning through his palm as he descended. When he hit the ground, Nayeli was already leading her mother toward the shadows near the rear wall. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the building behind them. The compound was now fully alerted to their presence, and lights were appearing in windows as men were roused to join the search. "The wall," Ethan directed, pointing to the section they had climbed earlier. "Can your mother manage it?" Nayeli conferred quickly with Makawi, who nodded firmly despite her evident exhaustion. "She says walls not first challenge of night," Nayeli translated. "Won't be last." They had almost reached the palisade when a voice rang out behind them. "Stop right there, Blackwood." Ethan turned to see Clayton Reed standing 20 yards away, a rifle aimed squarely at them. Beside him stood Reverend Sullivan, held firmly by 2 guards, his face bloodied. "I'm impressed," Reed called, his voice carrying in the cold night air. "Breaking into my compound, freeing my prisoners, quite the heroic effort." His tone was almost conversational, but his eyes were cold. "Unfortunately, it ends here." Ethan positioned himself between Reed's rifle and the 2 women. "Let us go, Reed. You've already lost." Reed laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Lost? I have 50 armed men at my disposal. I know the location of the spring. By this time tomorrow, I'll be bottling the most valuable water on earth." He gestured with his rifle. "What I've lost is my patience. Step aside or I'll shoot through you to get to them." "You need them," Ethan countered, stalling for time as he assessed their options. You said yourself you know the spring's location, but you don't know the ceremony. Without that, the water is just water. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Reed's face, quickly masked. The old woman will tell me what I need to know. She hasn't so far, Ethan pointed out. And tomorrow's the full moon. Your window of opportunity is closing. Reed's expression hardened. Then I'll just have to be more persuasive. He shifted his aim towards Sullivan. Perhaps the good Reverend's suffering will loosen her tongue. To Sullivan's credit, he showed no fear, merely looking at Reed with profound pity. You won't find what you're seeking, Clayton, he said quietly. Not this way. Silence. Reed snapped, his composure cracking. He turned back to Ethan. Final chance, Blackwood. Surrender or watch your friends die one by one. Behind them, Makawi suddenly began to sing a low, melodious chant that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. The sound was hypnotic, ancient, raising goosebumps on Ethan's arms. Reed frowned. Stop that noise, he demanded. But Makawi continued, her voice growing stronger with each note. Nayeli joined her, the two voices twining together in harmony. The effect was mesmerizing even to Ethan, who didn't understand the words. I said, stop, Reed shouted, raising his rifle. What happened next occurred so quickly that Ethan would later struggle to make sense of it. A sound like rushing wind filled the compound. The torches illuminating the yard flickered wildly, then extinguished altogether, plunging the area into darkness, broken only by moonlight. In that moment of confusion, Ethan felt Nayeli grasp his hand, pulling him toward the wall. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw Makawi already climbing her earlier weakness, seemingly forgotten, as she scaled the rough logs with surprising speed. Shouts and curses erupted behind them as Reed's men stumbled in the sudden darkness. A few wild shots rang out, bullets thudding into the palisade well away from their position. Within moments, they were over the wall and disappearing into the forest beyond, the sounds of pursuit fading as they moved silently through terrain. They knew better than their pursuers. Only when they had put considerable distance between themselves and the trading post did they pause to rest. Makawi sat on a fallen log, her burst of strength evidently waning. She spoke softly to Nayeli, who listened with evident concern. What happened back there? Ethan asked, still trying to process the strange events at the compound. The lights, the wind. Spirit help, Nayeli explained simply. Mother called ancestors. They answered. Ethan wasn't sure what to make of this explanation, but he had witnessed too many inexplicable things since meeting Nayeli to dismiss it outright. And Sullivan, he asked. We left him behind. Nayeli's expression grew somber. Mother says God-man has own path, own purpose. We cannot help now. We need to move, Ethan said after a moment, practical concerns reasserting themselves. Reed will send men after us, and we still need to rendezvous with your sisters. Makawi spoke again, and Nayeli translated. Mother says must go to Sacred Spring first. Reed will go there tomorrow night. Must protect. But your people at the main camp, Ethan reminded her. Kiona and Ayana will be waiting for us. Mother says they know. Will meet us at Spring. Nayeli hesitated. Says you must come too. Man saved by water has role to play. Ethan looked between the two women, one elderly, but emanating a quiet power that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment, the other fierce and determined, her eyes reflecting the same ancient wisdom as her mother's. He thought of the strange mark on his arm, the dreams he shared with Nayeli, of the miraculous recovery that had defied explanation. Whatever mystical forces were at work, he was somehow bound to them, had been since the day the flood carried him into the wilderness. Lead the way, he said simply. They traveled through the night, Makawi setting a pace that belied her age and recent captivity. She moved with purpose, following paths invisible to Ethan's eyes, but clearly marked by some sign or intuition he couldn't perceive. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the forest thinned, giving way to rocky slopes and alpine meadows silvered by moonlight. The air grew colder, crisper, carrying scents of pine and something else, a mineral freshness, that reminded Ethan of the moments after a thunderstorm. Close now, like Jelly said as they crested a ridge just before dawn. Sacred place ahead. Below them lay a small hidden valley cupped between towering peaks like a secret held in the palm of a giant hand. A still lake occupied its center, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the fading stars and lightning sky. At the lake's far edge, a series of terraced pools descended like steps, fed by a waterfall that emerged from the living rock of the mountainside. Even from this distance, there was something otherworldly about the place, a sense of deep peace and ancient power that Ethan could feel resonating in his bones. The sacred spring, he murmured. Nayeli nodded. Source of healing, connection between worlds. They descended into the valley as the first rays of sunlight touched the highest peaks. As they drew closer to the lake, Ethan noticed structures he hadn't seen from above, simple dwellings built into the hillsides, nearly invisible against the natural landscape. Your village, he realized. Yes, Nayeli confirmed. Home. Before Reedmen came. The dwellings showed signs of hasty abandonment, cooking implements, left beside cold fire pits, half-finished crafts, abandoned mid-creation. But there was no evidence of violence or destruction, suggesting the tribe had fled before Reed's men arrived. Makui led them directly to the largest dwelling partially built into the hillside with a roof of living sod that made it nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Inside, she retrieved items from various hiding places, bundles of herbs, pouches of pigment, ceremonial garments adorned with beads and feathers. Preparations, Nayeli explained as her mother worked, for protection ceremony. Tonight. Will your sisters make it in time? Ethan asked, concerned about Kiona and Ayana's absence. As if in answer to his question, a bird call sounded from outside, the distinctive cry of a hawk that Ethan recognized as the signal they had arranged. Nayeli rushed to the dwelling's entrance, returning moments later, with Kiona and Ayana both looking exhausted but triumphant. The reunion of the four women was deeply moving, Makawi embracing each daughter in turn, murmuring words that needed no translation to convey their emotion. Even the stoic Kiona's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she knelt before her mother. When greetings had been exchanged, Kiona reported in their native tongue with Nayeli translating the key points for Ethan. Many tribe members held at Reed Camp, she said, working like slaves. But Kiona and Ayana found helpers White Man Daniel, who left message, and others who disagree with Reed's ways. Plan made to free our people tonight when guards celebrate before full moon. Daniel Wilson, Ethan recalled from the letter, the missionary who's been living with your tribe. Ayana nodded, speaking for the first time in a while. Daniel, good man, respects old ways, help us secretly. So your people will be freed, Ethan concluded, but Reed still plans to come here tonight for the ceremony. Yes, Nayeli confirmed grimly, with many men, and brother of God man with government papers. Mekawi spoke again at length, her voice carrying the rhythm of formal declaration rather than conversation. When she finished, all three sisters looked at Ethan with new intensity. What did she say? He asked, uncomfortable under their scrutiny. Mother says you have role in ceremony, Nayeli translated. Man marked by water must stand with us. Complete circle. Ethan's hand went unconsciously to his scarred forearm. I don't understand. What does that mean? Sacred water chooses, Nayeli explained. 5 winters ago, water chose you, marked you, connected you. She touched her own wrist where the matching mark lay. Tonight, connection must be honored. The concept was foreign to Ethan's understanding of the world, yet he couldn't deny the evidence of his own experiences. The miraculous healing, the shared dreams, the inexplicable bond he felt with Nayeli in this place. What would I need to do? He asked cautiously. Makawi approached him, her dark eyes searching his face as if reading something written there. She spoke directly to him, though he couldn't understand her words. The cadence was gentle, almost like a blessing. She says you must open heart to land's voice, Nayeli translated. Let water wisdom flow through you as it did when you were between worlds. Between worlds, you mean when I was dying? Yes, when spirit walked between life and death, when sacred water called you back. Ethan wasn't sure he believed in spirits or sacred waters, but he couldn't deny that something extraordinary had happened to him 5 years ago, something that had left its mark not just on his arm, but on his very being. I'll do whatever is needed, he said finally, to protect your people in this place. Mekawi nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. She returned to her preparations, directing her daughters in tasks that appeared to be part of an elaborate ritual. As the day progressed, Ethan helped where he could, gathering specific plants. Ayana requested carrying water from the sacred pools, as directed by Makawi, building a circle of stones according to Nayeli's instructions. The work was physical, but carried an undercurrent of spiritual purpose that Ethan found strangely comforting. By late afternoon, the preparations were complete. The stone circle stood ready at the edge of the highest pool, adorned with symbols painted in natural pigments. Bundles of herbs burned at cardinal points, sending fragrant smoke spiraling into the clear mountain air. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Nayeli approached Ethan where he sat resting by the lakeside. Time comes soon, she said, sitting beside him. Moon rises when sun sets. Ethan nodded, gazing out over the tranquil water. What happens if Reed arrives during your ceremony? Ceremony creates protection, she explained. Makes sacred water hide itself from those with bad hearts. But if interrupted before completion, she didn't finish the thought, but her expression conveyed the gravity of such an outcome. Then we need to make sure you're not interrupted, Ethan said firmly. Nayeli studied him for a moment, then reached out and touched the scar on his arm. You feel it, the pull. He did. Since arriving in this valley, the mark had begun to tingle with increasing intensity, a sensation not quite pain, but a persistent awareness, as if something within him was responding to this place. Yes, he admitted, it's stronger here. Sacred water recognizes you, she said simply, remembers the life it saved. Ethan looked at his arm, then at the matching mark visible beneath Nayeli's leather bracelet. And us, this connection between us, is that also because of the water? Her eyes met his, dark and fathomless, as the lake before them. Water opens path, she said softly, but hearts choose to walk it. The implication hung between them, unspoken, but undeniable. Whatever bond had formed between them transcended the mystical connection of the sacred spring. It was something simpler and yet more profound, two souls recognizing each other across the divide of different worlds. Before Ethan could respond, Kiona appeared, calling out in their language. Her tone was urgent. Riders coming, Nayeli translated, rising quickly. From South Ridge, many men. Ethan stood hand moving to his rifle. Reed. Yes, coming sooner than expected. Nayeli's expression was determined. Ceremony must begin now. You must help mother and sisters. I will watch for Reed men. No, Ethan said firmly. Your place is with your family. I'll deal with Reed. She looked as if she might argue, but Makawi called from the stone circle, her voice carrying surprising strength. After a moment's hesitation, Nayeli nodded. Be careful, she said. Reed men have many guns. I've faced worse odds, Ethan replied, though in truth he wasn't sure that was accurate. As Nayeli hurried to join her mother and sisters at the ceremonial circle, Ethan positioned himself on a rocky outcropping that provided both cover and a clear view of the southern approach to the valley. From here he could see the narrow trail that wound down from the ridge, the only practical route for horses. Through his rifle scope, he counted at least 15 riders descending the trail in single file. Reed himself rode at the front, followed by a man in a suit, who Ethan guessed was Thomas Sullivan, the Reverend's brother. The others appeared to be hired guns, their expressions grim and purposeful. Behind him, Makawi began to sing the same haunting melody she had used at the trading post. Her daughters joined in their voices, weaving around hers in complex harmony. Even without understanding the words, Ethan felt their power, a resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very stones beneath his feet. As the sun touched the western peaks and the first edge of the full moon appeared above the eastern horizon, Ethan prepared himself for what might be his final stand. He was one man against 15, with only a rifle, a pistol, and the desperate need to protect not just Nayeli and her family, but a sacred place whose significance he was only beginning to understand. The riders drew closer now, less than half a mile from the valley floor. Ethan took a deep breath, steadying his aim on the lead rider. Behind him, the ceremony intensified, the women's voices rising in fervent prayer or invocation. Just as Reed's party reached the final switchback before the valley floor, the world around Ethan began to change. The air shimmered like heat rising from sun-baked stone. The song behind him grew louder, not in volume but in presence, as if it now emanated from the land itself rather than human throats. And then, most astonishing of all, the sacred pools began to glow a soft blue luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with the song. The light spread to the lake, then to the streams feeding it, until the entire valley was traced with veins of living light. On the trail, the horses balked, refusing to proceed despite their riders' urging. Even from this distance, Ethan could see Reed's fury as he dismounted and attempted to proceed on foot, only to find himself apparently unable to advance beyond some invisible barrier. The businessman's rage was visible in his gestures as he shouted at his men, some of whom also dismounted, to try different approaches to the valley. None succeeded. It was as if the valley itself had closed its borders to those who sought to exploit its treasures. As the full moon rose fully above the eastern ridge, bathing the scene in silver light that merged with the blue glow of the waters, Ethan felt a sudden sharp pain in his scarred arm. He rolled up his sleeve to find the mark glowing with the same blue luminescence as the sacred pools. The pain intensified briefly, then transformed into a wave of sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced, a feeling of connection to everything around him. The rocks, the trees, the water, the sky, and most intensely to the four women whose voices had summoned this miracle. In that moment of transcendent awareness, Ethan understood what Nayeli had tried to explain. The sacred spring wasn't simply water with healing properties, it was a nexus where the physical and spiritual realms touched, where the barriers between worlds grew thin enough for communion. And he, Ethan Blackwood, once a skeptic who trusted only what he could see and touch, had become a part of that communion through the mark the water had left upon him. The realization was both humbling and exhilarating. As the ceremony reached its crescendo, and the blue light pulsed one final time before beginning to fade, Ethan knew with certainty that his life had been forever altered, not just 5 years ago, when floodwaters carried him to the brink of death, but here and now as he witnessed the power of belief made manifest before his eyes. Reed and his men remained at the valley's edge, still attempting to breach the invisible barrier, but with diminishing conviction. Some had already remounted, clearly unnerved by what they had witnessed. As the song behind him gradually subsided, Ethan turned to see Nayeli approaching, her face luminous with spent power and quiet triumph. It is done, she said simply. Sacred place protected. Reed cannot enter. Not tonight. Not ever. Ethan looked back at the frustrated figures on the ridge. What exactly happened? Ceremony of concealment, she explained. Ancient protection, valley now hidden from those who would harm it. They see only ordinary place, rocks, trees, small pond, sacred waters invisible to greedy eyes. But they can still see us, Ethan pointed out, and they have guns. Nayeli smiled, a rare expression that transformed her serious features. Look again, she said. When Ethan turned back to the ridge, he was astounded to see Reed and his men departing, riding back up the trail with a dejected posture of those who had failed in their mission. They're leaving, just like that. They see nothing worth staying for, Nayeli explained. Magic of concealment, strong, makes minds forget purpose. They return to town confused, remembering only wild goose chase for legend that doesn't exist. Ethan shook his head in wonder. And this protection will last as long as sacred water flows, as long as ceremony remembered. Her expression grew more serious. But Reed's still dangerous. Still has power in World Beyond Valley. Still holds grudge against you. I'll handle Reed, Ethan said with more confidence than he felt. What matters is that your people in this place are safe. Nayeli studied him thoughtfully. And you? Where does Ethan Blackwood go when moon sets? The question caught him off guard. In the intensity of recent events, he hadn't considered what would come after. Would he return to his ranch, to his solitary existence? The prospect suddenly seemed hollow, lacking the meaning and connection he had found in this valley. Before he could formulate an answer, Makawi approached her daughters, flanking her like honor guards. Though she had been a prisoner mere hours ago, she now moved with the dignity and presence of a true leader. She spoke directly to Ethan, her words flowing like the sacred waters themselves. Nayeli translated. Mother says man marked by water belongs to two worlds now. Has place here if heart chooses. Has purpose if spirit willing. Ethan looked at the four women before him, then at the valley that had just revealed its magic to him, then finally at his own scarred arm, the mark that connected him to this place and these people. Tell your mother, he said slowly, that my heart and spirit are willing to learn what that purpose might be. Makawi smiled, reaching out to touch his face with a weathered hand. She spoke again, just a few words this time. She says, Nayeli translated, her own voice soft with emotion. Welcome home, son of water. Dawn spread golden fingers across the sacred valley, touching each pool with light that transformed ordinary water into liquid amber. Ethan stood on a rocky outcropping above the lake, watching as members of the tribe released during the night from Reed's camp according to plan, made their way into the valley in small groups. The reunion of the scattered people was a sight that stirred something profound in Ethan's chest. Children ran to parents, elders, embraced youths, warriors clasped forearms with those they had feared lost. Through it all moved Makawi, her presence a center of gravity around which the tribe reorganized itself. Nayeli approached carrying 2 wooden cups. You haven't slept, she observed, handing him one. Too much to see, Ethan replied, accepting the drink of herbal tea that carried the scent of pine and something sweeter. Your people are returning. Yes, Kiona's message reached those hiding in mountains. Daniel freed others from Reed camp during confusion. She looked out over the gathering below. First time since Reed men came that tribe stands together. What happens now, Ethan asked. Reed won't give up easily despite what happened last night. Nayeli's expression grew somber. Council gathers at midday. Must decide future of tribe. She glanced at him. Mother asked you to attend. The invitation surprised him. Me, I'm not part of your tribe. Water marked you, she said simply, touching her own wrist where the matching sign lay. Makes you connected, gives you voice in council. Ethan wasn't sure how to respond. Last night's ceremony had shaken his understanding of the world, revealing forces he had never believed in, yet could no longer deny. The glowing waters, the invisible barrier that had repelled Reed and his men, the resonance he had felt with the land itself, all challenged the practical worldview he had maintained even after his miraculous survival 5 years ago. I'm not sure what I could contribute, he said finally. Fresh eyes see paths others miss, Nayeli replied. Tribe needs all wisdom now. Before Ethan could respond, further movement at the valley's edge caught his attention. A solitary figure was making his way down the trail from the ridge, not part of the returning tribal groups, but moving with purpose nonetheless. Someone's coming, he said, reaching for his rifle. Nayeli followed his gaze, then relaxed. Daniel, she identified. Missionary who helped free our people. As the figure drew closer, Ethan could make out a tall, lean man with a short beard dressed in a curious blend of Western clothing and native garments. He carried no visible weapons and moved with the easy confidence of someone familiar with the terrain. They descended to meet him at the valley floor. Up close, Daniel Wilson appeared older than Ethan had expected, perhaps in his 50s, with weathered skin and eyes that carried both intelligence and weariness. Ms. Nayeli, he greeted her with evident respect. It does my heart good to see you free. His gaze shifted to Ethan, curious but not unfriendly. And you must be Ethan Blackwood. I've heard much about you. Mr. Wilson, Ethan acknowledged. Thank you for what you did at Reed's camp. Daniel shook his head modestly. I merely opened a few doors. The courage was all theirs. He turned back to Nayeli. I bear news that cannot wait for the council. May I speak with Makawi immediately? Something in his tone conveyed urgency. Nayeli nodded, leading them to where her mother was organizing the tribe's temporary settlement near the sacred pools. Makawi greeted Daniel warmly, clasping his forearms in the tribal gesture of respect. He spoke to her directly in her own language, his facility with the complex tongue surprising Ethan. Whatever he said caused Makawi's expression to grow grave. After a brief exchange, Makawi turned to Ethan. Daniel brings warning, she said, her English accented but clear, the first time she had spoken directly to him in a language he understood. Reed not finished, has sent for soldiers. Soldiers, Ethan repeated, alarmed. U.S. Army. Daniel nodded grimly. A detachment from Fort Bridger. Reed's partner in the territorial government, Thomas Sullivan, has filed papers claiming this valley contains insurrectionists who attacked a legitimate mining operation. That's a lie, Ethan said angrily. Of course it is, Daniel agreed, but it's a lie with official backing. The troops have orders to clear the valley and escort Reed's men to secure the mineral rights he's suddenly claiming. Nayeli's eyes flashed. No soldiers can enter now. Protection ceremony worked. Daniel looked uncomfortable. The ceremony may hide the sacred nature of this place, but it can't make the valley itself invisible. The soldiers will still see people they consider hostile Indians occupying land the government has now designated for development. The implications were clear and chilling. What Reed couldn't accomplish through trickery or force, he would now attempt through the machinery of governmental authority. How much time do we have? Ethan asked. 2 days at most, Daniel replied. The detachment was preparing to depart when I left to come here. Makawi spoke rapidly to Nayeli, who translated for Ethan's benefit. Mother says council must gather now, not at midday. All must hear this news. Within the hour, the tribe had assembled in a natural amphitheater near the lake's edge. Several hundred people sat in concentric circles around a central fire, with Makawi and the tribal elders forming the innermost ring. Ethan found himself placed in this circle as well between Nayeli and Daniel, a position whose significance was not lost on him. The council began with ritual prayers in the tribal tongue, the passing of a ceremonial pipe, acknowledgments of the sacred waters and the ancestors. Then Makawi rose to address her people, her voice carrying surprising strength across the gathering. She spoke at length in their native language, occasionally gesturing toward Daniel or Ethan. The tribe listened in attentive silence, their expressions growing increasingly concerned as she continued. When she finished, an elder with a face deeply lined by sun and years stood to speak. His manner was forceful, his gestures emphatic. Others followed, men and women of various ages, each contributing their perspective to what was clearly becoming a heated debate. What are they saying? Ethan asked Nayeli quietly. Deciding future of tribe, she replied. Some say fight, defend sacred land as ancestors did. Others say leave, find new home where white man's reach doesn't extend. Some suggest split tribe, some stay hidden here. Others go to reservation where government promises protection. But no option is without risk, Ethan observed. No, Nayeli agreed soberly. All paths lead to suffering. Question is which suffering tribe can bear. The debate continued as the sun climbed higher. Various speakers rose and fell, some passionate, others pragmatic. Through it all, Makawi listened with the patience of one who had weathered many such storms. Finally, she raised her hand, and immediate silence fell over the gathering. She spoke again, this time directly to Ethan, her words translated by Nayeli. Mother asks what man marked by water thinks. You stand between worlds, know white man's ways, but feel water's song. What path would you choose? All eyes turned to Ethan. He felt the weight of their attentions, the expectation that he might offer some insight their own deliberations had not produced. He rose slowly, conscious of his position as an outsider, granted an unusual privilege. I can't tell you what choice to make, he began, Nayeli translating his words into the tribal language. This is your home, your sacred place, your decision. But I can tell you what I've learned in the short time I've known your people. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've seen your strength, not just in battle, but in spirit. I've witnessed magic I cannot explain, but can no longer deny. I've felt a connection between this land and those who protect it. His hand moved unconsciously to his scarred forearm. Reed wants this valley for greed. He sees the sacred water as a commodity to be bottled and sold. The government sees the land as a resource to be claimed and developed. Neither understands what would be lost if the waterkeepers were driven from their home. Ethan looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of those who would decide their people's fate. If you abandon this place, something precious will die, not just for your tribe, but for the world. If you fight with weapons, you will lose to superior firepower. But perhaps there is a third path. Interest stirred in the gathering as Nayeli translated his words. Makawi leaned forward slightly, her ancient eyes fixed on his face. Reed is using the government's power against you, Ethan continued, but that power has rules, laws, limitations. I've spent years avoiding the wider world, hiding on my ranch after losing my father. But in doing so, I've neglected the tools that might now serve your cause. What tools? Makawi asked through Nayeli. Legal claims, public opinion, the very system Reed is attempting to manipulate. Ethan grew more confident as the idea took shape. My father left me more than land. He left connections to people with influence. People who might listen if approached correctly. Daniel nodded slowly as he grasped Ethan's suggestion. He's right. The territorial courts have recognized certain native land claims when properly presented. And the Eastern newspapers are increasingly sympathetic to indigenous causes, particularly when exploitation by wealthy interests is involved. Murmurs spread through the gathering as Nayeli translated this exchange. Ethan could see doubt on many faces, but also flickers of hope. What you suggest takes time, Makawi observed. Soldiers come in 2 days. Then we need to buy that time, Ethan replied, and I believe I know how. As the council concluded, Ethan found himself walking the perimeter of the sacred lake with Nayeli, Daniel, and Kiona. He had outlined his plan, and now they were discussing the practical details of implementation. Reed expects the tribe to either flee or fight, Ethan explained. Either way, he wins. Either this valley is abandoned and he claims it unopposed, or there's violence that justifies military intervention. So we give him neither, Daniel concluded. No flight, no fight. Exactly. Instead, we meet the soldiers with paperwork, not weapons. Kiona spoke rapidly in her native tongue, her expression skeptical. Nayeli translated. Sister asked what papers stop bullets. The right papers might prevent the bullets from being fired in the first place, Ethan replied. Thomas Sullivan, the Reverend's brother, has filed claims based on falsehoods. If we can expose those falsehoods before the soldiers act on their orders, we create doubt. Doubt leads to delay. Delay gives us time to pursue legal recognition of the tribe's claim to this land. And how do we expose these falsehoods? Daniel asked. That's where you come in, Ethan said. You've lived with the tribe for years. You're a respected missionary with connections to churches in the East. Your testimony about Reed's actions, the forced labor, the kidnapping, the attempts to steal tribal resources, would carry weight. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. I could certainly provide such testimony, and I have friends at several newspapers who might be interested in the story. Meanwhile, Ethan continued, I'll ride to Redemption Springs immediately. The territorial judge visits monthly to handle legal matters. With luck, he's there now. I'll file an emergency injunction against Reed's claims citing evidence of fraud and exploitation. What of Reverend Sullivan? Nayeli asked. Still Reed's prisoner. Ethan's expression darkened. That's another crime to add to Reed's list. But we can't help Sullivan if we're all driven from this valley at gunpoint. I'll go with you, Nayeli declared, not a question, but a statement of intent. Ethan started to object, then reconsidered. Having a tribal representative present would strengthen their case, and Nayeli's intelligence and determination would be valuable assets. Very well, he agreed, but we need to leave immediately if we're to reach town by nightfall. Kiona spoke again at length and with evident concern. Nayeli replied with equal intensity, the sisters clearly disagreeing about something fundamental. What's the issue? Ethan asked when their exchange finally paused. Kiona thinks I should not trust white man's law, Nayeli explained. Says papers and courts, just another trap. She may be right, Ethan acknowledged. The system isn't perfect, and it's often biased against native peoples. But right now, it's the best chance your tribe has. Kiona studied him for a long moment, her fierce eyes searching for any sign of deception. Finally, she spoke directly to him in careful accented English. You fail, many die. I know, Ethan replied solemnly. I won't fail. So, the ride to Redemption Springs was hard and fast with minimal stops. Ethan and Nayeli pushed their horses to the limit of safe travel, following game trails and shortcuts that kept them away from Reed's likely patrols. As they rode, Ethan found himself watching Nayeli with growing admiration. She matched his pace without complaint, her riding skills equal to his own, despite her years of captivity. The woman who had once seemed so foreign, so mysterious, now revealed layers of strength and intelligence that transcended cultural boundaries. You're staring, she observed during a brief rest to water the horses at a stream. Thinking, Ethan corrected, though he couldn't deny the charge. About how much has changed in a week. For you or for me, she asked. Both, I suppose. He watched as she knelt by the stream, drinking from cupped hands. A week ago, I was alone on my ranch, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life that way. Now I'm racing to town to file legal papers on behalf of a tribe I barely knew existed. Nayeli rose, wiping water from her chin. And I was in chains, believing mother dead, sisters lost. Now family reunited, tribe gathering. She met his eyes. Change is not finished, I think. The implication hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Whatever connection had formed between them, through the sacred water's mark, through shared purpose, through growing mutual respect, it was evolving into something neither had anticipated. No, Ethan agreed quietly. I don't believe they are. They reached Redemption Springs as the sun was setting, the small frontier town backlit by crimson and gold. Ethan led them to the rear of the general store where the owner, Harold Miller, had been a friend of his father's. Wait here, he told Nayeli, helping her dismount in the shadow of the building. I need to see if Miller is still friendly before I bring you into town. She nodded, understanding the precaution. Reed's influence ran deep in Redemption Springs, and a native woman would attract unwanted attention. Ethan entered the store through the back entrance, finding Miller tallying the day's receipts behind the counter. The shopkeeper looked up in surprise. Blackwood haven't seen you in town for weeks. Heard there was trouble out at your place. That's putting it mildly, Harold, Ethan replied. I need your help. Is Judge Parker still in town? Miller nodded. Holding court tomorrow morning, last day before he moves on to Fort Bridger. He studied Ethan with concern. You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet, son. What's happened? Briefly, Ethan outlined the situation, Reed's exploitation of the tribe, the false claims filed with the territorial government, the soldiers being summoned under false pretenses. He omitted the more mystical elements of recent events, focusing on the legal and moral issues that Miller would understand. That's a heap of trouble, Miller said when Ethan finished. Reed's got half the town council in his pocket and Sheriff Tanner won't cross him. But Judge Parker's different, straight as an arrow and beholden to no one. He hesitated. Still, going against Reed is dangerous. He doesn't forgive those who interfere with his business. I'm already on his list, Ethan said grimly. One more reason won't make much difference. Miller sighed. What do you need from me? A place for us to stay tonight out of sight, and information on where I can find Judge Parker this evening. I need to speak with him before court tomorrow. Us. Miller raised an eyebrow. In answer, Ethan went to the back door and signaled to Nayeli, who entered quietly. Miller's eyes widened slightly, but to his credit, he showed no other reaction to her presence. Ma'am, he said with a respectful nod, any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. Thank you, Nayeli replied simply. Miller turned back to Ethan. Judge stays at the Carson Hotel when he's in town. Takes his dinner in the private dining room around 8 o'clock. As for staying out of sight, he considered for a moment. The storage room upstairs has a cot. Not much, but it's clean and private. That's perfect, Ethan said gratefully. One more thing. Do you know if Reverend Sullivan has returned to town? Miller's expression grew somber. That's another strange business. He disappeared 4 days ago. His housekeeper reported it to Sheriff Tanner, but nothing's been done. Some say he went on a mission trip, others whisper darker things. What darker things? Nayeli asked. That he crossed Reed somehow, Miller replied. In this town, that's a dangerous proposition. Ethan exchanged a glance with Nayeli. Sullivan's continued absence confirmed their fears. He remained Reed's prisoner, perhaps held as leverage against his brother in the territorial government. We need to move quickly, Ethan said. Harold, can you get a message to Judge Parker? Ask if he'll see me before court tomorrow. Say it's regarding an emergency injunction against Clayton Reed. Miller whistled softly. That'll get his attention right enough. I'll take it myself. He glanced at the clock behind the counter. It's nearly 7 now. Why don't you two head upstairs while I deliver your message? Less chance of being seen that way. The storage room above the store was cramped, but clean as Miller had promised. Crates of merchandise lined the walls, leaving just enough space for a narrow cot and a small table with a lantern. A single window overlooked the alley behind the store. Not exactly the Palmer house, Ethan said apologetically as he lit the lantern. Better than Reed's cage, Nayeli replied, practically examining the space with curious eyes. She picked up a bolt of brightly colored cloth from an open crate. So many things. Your people have much. Too much, some would say, Ethan agreed, watching as she ran her fingers over the fabric. We tend to measure worth by possessions rather than connections. Sad way to live, she observed, replacing the cloth. Empty houses full of empty things. Her simple assessment struck Ethan as profoundly accurate. His own ranch, though prosperous enough, had become exactly that, an empty house filled with possessions that offered no companionship or purpose since his father's death. Before he could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced Miller's return. The shopkeeper entered with a tray of food and a folded note. Judge Parker will see you at 9 o'clock in his hotel room, he reported, handing Ethan the note, a brief confirmation in a precise judicial hand. I brought you some supper. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. You're a good friend, Harold, Ethan said sincerely. I won't forget this. Miller waved away the thanks. Your father would have done the same for me. He glanced at Nayeli, then back to Ethan. Be careful tonight. Reed's men have been drinking at the saloon since sundown. Town's not safe for either of you. After Miller departed, Ethan and Nayeli shared the simple meal: beef stew, cornbread, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of the challenges ahead. What will you tell Judge? Nayeli asked finally. The truth, Ethan replied, that Reed is using false claims to steal land from your people, that he's holding prisoners illegally, that he's summoned troops under false pretenses. Will Judge believe? Parker has a reputation for fairness. If I can present enough evidence to raise doubts about Reed's claims, he might issue a temporary injunction, an order preventing the soldiers from acting until the full case can be heard. Nayeli nodded, though her expression remained concerned. And if Judge doesn't believe, Ethan had been asking himself the same question. Then we try another approach. Daniel is contacting the newspapers. Public opinion can be powerful, especially in election years. Many paths, Nayeli observed. Wisdom in not relying on one. Exactly. Ethan checked his pocket watch. It's nearly time. I should go to the hotel. I come too, Nayeli said firmly. Ethan hesitated. It might be safer for you to stay here. Reed's men. Judge must hear from tribe's voice, she interrupted. Not just white man speaking for us. Mother would say same. She was right, of course. Her presence would lend credibility to their petition, demonstrating that this wasn't just Ethan's crusade, but a legitimate tribal grievance. All right, he conceded, but we'll need to be careful. The Carson Hotel is on the main street, and at this hour, the saloon across the way will be full of Reed supporters. They left through the back door of the store, keeping to shadows and side streets as they made their way toward the hotel. Redemption Springs was a small town, but on Saturday nights it came alive with cowboys, miners, and laborers seeking relief from the isolation of frontier life. The saloon was indeed crowded, raucous laughter and piano music spilling into the street. The Carson Hotel stood opposite a 3-story structure that represented the town's aspirations to civilization. Its lobby was modest but clean, with an elderly clerk dozing behind the desk. Judge Parker's room, Ethan inquired quietly. The clerk started awake. Room 12, top floor. His bleary eyes focused on Nayeli, widening slightly before a professional mask reasserted itself. "He's expecting you." "Yes," Ethan confirmed, showing the note. The clerk nodded, returning to his doze as they climbed the stairs. Judge Horace Parker was not what Ethan had expected. Rather than the stern, imposing figure of frontier justice, he had imagined Parker was a small, wiry man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that failed to conceal a prominent scar along his jaw. He greeted them courteously, showing no surprise at Nayeli's presence. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, gesturing to chairs arranged near the room's small fireplace. "And Ms. Nayeli," she supplied, "of the Otaka'anuto, the Waterkeepers." "Please sit," Parker invited. Miller's note mentioned an emergency injunction against Clayton Reed. "That's a serious matter requiring substantial evidence." "We have evidence, Your Honor," Ethan assured him, taking a seat. "And witnesses." Over the next hour, they presented their case, Nayeli describing her people's traditional claim to the Sacred Valley, their forced displacement by Reed's men, the capture and enslavement of tribal members. Ethan outlined the legal aspects, focusing on Reed's false claims to the territorial government and his manipulation of military resources for private gain. Parker listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no indication of his thoughts. When they finished, he sat in silence for several moments, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You realize," he said finally, "that what you're alleging constitutes serious crimes on Mr. Reed's part. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, misappropriation of military resources." He looked at Nayeli. "And crimes against your people that, while not always recognized by territorial law, are no less grave in a moral sense." "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan confirmed. "You also realize that Mr. Reed is a powerful man in this region. He has friends in the territorial government, business interests throughout the county, and considerable influence with local authorities." "We're aware of the challenges, Your Honor." Parker nodded slowly. "I've heard rumors about Reed's operations for some time, questionable labor practices, dubious land acquisitions. But rumors are not evidence, and until now, no one has been willing to bring formal charges." He turned to Nayeli. "Your people have never filed a legal claim to the valley." "Our claim older than your laws," she replied simply, "written in land, in water, in blood of ancestors, not on paper." "Unfortunately, territorial courts recognize paper," Parker said, though not unkindly. "Without a documented claim, your tribe's case becomes much more difficult." Ethan felt his hopes sinking. Without an injunction, the soldiers would reach the valley in less than 2 days. The tribe would face an impossible choice between violent resistance or forced removal. However, Parker continued, reaching for a sheet of paper. "I am troubled by the allegations regarding Reverend Sullivan's disappearance and the misrepresentation of facts to military authorities." He began writing. "I cannot issue a full injunction based solely on your testimony, but I can issue a temporary stay of action pending investigation." Relief washed through Ethan. A temporary stay wasn't everything they had hoped for, but it would buy precious time for Daniel to contact the newspapers, time for more evidence to be gathered, time for legal papers to be filed establishing the tribe's claim. "The stay will direct the military detachment to suspend any action against the tribe for a period of 14 days, Parker explained as he wrote. "During that time, my court will investigate the competing claims to the valley and the allegations against Mr. Reed." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan said earnestly. Parker looked up from his writing, his expression grave. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Blackwood. This stay is a procedural matter, not a judgment on the merits of your case. Reed will fight it vigorously, and he has resources you lack." His gaze shifted to Nayeli. "And while I personally find your tribe's claim compelling, territorial law has historically favored development interests over indigenous rights." "We understand the challenges," Ethan assured him, "but this gives us a chance to present our full case." "Indeed." Parker finished writing and affixed his seal to the document. "This stay will be delivered to the commander of the military detachment first thing tomorrow morning by official courier. I suggest you use the 14 days wisely." As they rose to leave, Parker added, "One more thing, Mr. Blackwood. Reed will know who requested this stay. He will not be pleased. You should watch your back." "I'm already on his list, Your Honor," Ethan replied grimly. "This just moves me higher." They left the hotel, cautiously keeping to the shadows as they made their way back toward Miller's store. The saloon across the street was still active, but the crowd had thinned somewhat as the hour grew late. "A good beginning," Nayeli said quietly as they walked. "Judge sees truth, even if laws make path difficult." "Yes," Ethan agreed. "Now we need to—" He broke off as a group of men emerged from the saloon directly ahead of them. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, Ethan recognized several of Reed's foremen among them. Quickly, he pulled Nayeli into the narrow space between two buildings. "Reed's men," he whispered. "We need to wait until they pass." They pressed themselves against the wall of the alley, holding perfectly still as the men approached. The group was clearly intoxicated, their loud conversation punctuated by coarse laughter. "Reed says we move out tomorrow," one man was saying. "Wants us at the camp before the soldiers arrive." "What about the injunction?" another asked. "Heard some judge signed papers delaying the military." A third man laughed harshly. "Papers burn, friend, and judges can have accidents." Reed's got it all planned. The conversation faded as the men continued down the street, but Ethan and Nayeli remained frozen in place, the implications of what they'd overheard sinking in. Reed knows about the stay already, Ethan murmured, and he plans to ignore it or prevent it from being delivered. Judge in danger, Nayeli asked, her voice tight with concern. Possibly, we need to warn him. Ethan peered carefully out of the alley. The street's clear now, let's hurry. They had just stepped back onto the boardwalk when a familiar voice called from behind them. Well, look who's come to town. Ethan turned slowly to find Clayton Reed himself standing 20 yards away, flanked by four men whose hands rested meaningfully on holstered pistols. Reed looked immaculate as always, his suit unwrinkled despite the late hour, his smile cold and calculating. Reed, Ethan acknowledged, subtly positioning himself between the businessman and Nayeli. I must say you've been remarkably troublesome, Blackwood, Reed observed conversationally. First stealing my property at the auction, then interfering with my mining operations, and now I hear you've been visiting Judge Parker with wild tales and requests for injunctions. Not tales, Ethan replied evenly. Truth about kidnapping, forced labor, and fraud. Reed's smile didn't waver. Strong accusations from a man currently harboring a fugitive. He nodded toward Nayeli. That woman is my property purchased legally at public auction. People aren't property, Ethan said, anger building in his chest. Not here, not anywhere, not anymore. The territorial courts might disagree, Reed countered smoothly. But we needn't involve them. I'm a reasonable man. Return the woman and her sisters to me. Lead me to the spring I seek and all will be forgiven. You can return to your ranch and your solitary existence, and I'll forget this unfortunate series of events. And if I refuse, Reed's smile finally faded, then you'll never reach Miller's store alive. The injunction will mysteriously fail to reach the military detachment, and Judge Parker will suffer an unfortunate accident on his journey to Fort Bridger. The threat was delivered so matter-of-factly that its menace was amplified. Reed was not bluffing. He was stating intentions he fully expected to carry out. You'd murder a federal judge, Ethan asked, buying time as he assessed their options. The alley behind them was a dead end. The street ahead was blocked by Reed and his men. The only possible escape route was through the gap between buildings to their right, which might lead to the back of the hotel. Accidents happen on frontier roads, Reed replied with a shrug, particularly to those who meddle in matters beyond their jurisdiction. Nayeli had remained silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward to stand beside Ethan rather than behind him. You seek sacred water, she said directly to Reed, but water judges souls. Yours too corrupt to touch it. Reed's expression hardened. Philosophy from a savage. How quaint. He signaled to his men. Take them both, kill him if necessary, but I want her alive. What happened next occurred so quickly that Ethan would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. As Reed's men advanced, Nayeli suddenly dropped to one knee, pressing her palm flat against the dusty street. She began to sing the same haunting melody Mekawi had used during the ceremony at the sacred pools. The effect was immediate and inexplicable. The ground beneath Reed and his men seemed to shift, causing them to stagger, as if drunk or standing on the deck of a storm-tossed ship. Their confusion lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Run, Nayeli hissed, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him toward the gap between buildings. They sprinted through the narrow passage, emerging behind the hotel just as shouts erupted from the street. Without pausing, they raced toward the stables where they had left their horses earlier that evening. What did you do back there? Ethan asked as they ran. Called to water beneath street, Nayeli replied, her breathing steady despite their pace. All land remembers it was once riverbed. Water still flows below, even in towns. Ethan had no response to this explanation, which challenged his understanding of the physical world, yet aligned with the inexplicable events he had witnessed in recent days. They reached the stables and quickly saddled their mounts, the horses sensing their urgency and growing restless. As Ethan tightened the last strap, the stable doors burst open to reveal two of Reed's men, pistols drawn. Don't move a Blackwood, one shouted. Ethan froze, calculating the distance to his rifle secured in its scabbard on his saddle. Too far. The men would fire before he could reach it. A sudden commotion outside drew the gunmen's attention, shouting the sound of running feet. In that moment of distraction, Nayeli acted. She flung a handful of something from her pouch directly into the men's faces, a powder that caused them to cry out, clawing at their eyes. Blinding herb, she explained as they mounted quickly. Temporary. They burst from the stables at a gallop, scattering a group of Reed's men who were just arriving. Shots rang out behind them, but in the darkness and confusion, none found their mark. As they thundered out of town, Ethan realized they had left without confirming that Judge Parker would receive protection. The injunction was useless if Reed prevented its delivery or eliminated the judge himself. We need to warn Parker, he called to Nayeli as they rode. Reed means to kill him. She nodded, understanding his concern. Cannot return to town. Too dangerous. There's another way, Ethan decided. We'll ride to Fort Bridger directly. If we push hard through the night, we can reach it by dawn before Reed's men before the injunction courier. We'll warn the commander ourselves. It was a desperate plan requiring a punishing night ride through difficult terrain. But the alternative was to let Reed succeed in his murderous scheme, dooming the tribe to military displacement, or worse. Lead, Nayeli said simply. I follow. The night ride to Fort Bridger was a blur of moonlit trails, steep descents, and treacherous river crossings. They pushed their horses to the limit of endurance, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the animals. Dawn found them approaching the fort, a substantial military outpost consisting of several buildings arranged around a central parade ground, the whole surrounded by a timber palisade. The American flag hung limp in the still morning air as they approached the main gate. The sentry regarded them with suspicion, particularly Nayeli. "State your business." "We need to see the commanding officer immediately," Ethan replied. "It's regarding the detachment ordered to Redemption Springs." "Colonel Hargrove doesn't receive visitors before morning parade," the sentry informed them. "This can't wait," Ethan insisted. "Lives are at stake, including Judge Parker's." The mention of the judge's name caused the sentry to hesitate. After a moment's consideration, he signaled to another soldier. "Jenkins, escort these two to the colonel's office. Stay with them." They were led through the fort to a well-maintained building that served as headquarters. Inside, they found Colonel Hargrove already at his desk, despite the early hour, a testament to military discipline. He was a middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed mustache and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent years in frontier postings. "Sir," their escort reported, "these civilians insist on seeing you regarding the Redemption Springs detachment and Judge Parker." Hargrove looked up from his papers, studying them with sharp eyes. "I'm listening." Ethan introduced himself, and Nayeli then quickly outlined the situation: Reed's false claims, the judge's injunction, and most urgently, the threat to Parker's life. "Serious allegations, Mr. Blackwood," Hargrove observed when Ethan finished. "Do you have evidence to support them?" "The injunction itself should be en route here now," Ethan replied. "And we have witnesses who can testify to Reed's crimes, including a missionary who has lived with the tribe for years." "Daniel Wilson," Nayeli added, "known to many white churches." Hargrove leaned back in his chair, considering. "I received orders yesterday from the territorial capital to dispatch a detachment to assist in clearing hostile Indians from land legally claimed for mining development. Those orders came with all proper signatures and seals." "Based on false information," Ethan insisted. "Reed has a partner in the territorial government, Thomas Sullivan, the land commissioner. He's using his position to legitimize Reed's theft." The colonel's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes at the mention of Sullivan's name. "I've had dealings with Commissioner Sullivan before," he said carefully. "Not all of them, straightforward." This hint of skepticism gave Ethan hope. "Colonel, all we ask is that you delay the detachment's departure until Judge Parker's injunction arrives and can be properly reviewed. A few hours could prevent a grave injustice." Hargrove studied them both for a long moment, his military discipline warring visibly with his sense of justice. Finally, he reached a decision. "The detachment was scheduled to depart at noon," he said. "I'll delay that departure until tomorrow morning, citing the need for additional supplies. That should give the judge's courier time to arrive, assuming he's on his way." "And Judge Parker himself," Ethan pressed. Reed's threats against him were explicit. "I'll dispatch riders immediately to intercept the judge on the road from Redemption Springs and provide escort," Hargrove promised. "If what you say is true, Mr. Blackwood Parker will have my full protection." Relief washed through Ethan. They had succeeded in buying critical time for the injunction to take effect, time for Daniel to contact his newspaper connections, time for the tribe to strengthen their position. "Thank you, Colonel," he said sincerely. Hargrove's expression remained stern. "Don't thank me yet. I'm delaying action, not canceling it. If the injunction doesn't arrive, or if it proves insufficient, my orders stand. The detachment will move out tomorrow as planned." It was a conditional victory at best, but it was more than they had dared hope for when they rode through the night. As they prepared to depart the fort, Nayeli touched Ethan's arm. "We succeeded," she said quietly. "First step on long path." "Yes," he agreed, "but Reed won't give up easily. When he learns the military action has been delayed, he'll try another approach." "Then we must be ready," she replied simply. "Many paths, remember." Ethan nodded, drawing strength from her calm determination. Together, they mounted their tired horses and began the long journey back to the Sacred Valley, where a tribe waited to hear whether they faced imminent military action or had won a reprieve to fight for their ancestral home. They rode at a more measured pace on the return journey, mindful of their exhausted mounts and the need to avoid Reed's men who might be patrolling the trails. By midday, they had reached the foothills leading to the Sacred Valley. As they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream, Ethan found himself studying Nayeli with new eyes. In the short time he had known her, she had transformed in his perception from a mysterious other to a woman of extraordinary courage, intelligence, and spiritual depth. The connection between them had likewise evolved from the mystical bond of the water's mark to something more personal, more profound. "You're staring again," she observed, meeting his gaze directly. This time Ethan didn't deny it. "I'm trying to understand," he said. "Understand what? How someone who has suffered as you have captivity, separation from your family, the threat to your people's way of life, can remain so centered, so certain." Nayeli considered his question thoughtfully. "Suffering part of life," she said finally. "Like joy, like love, like death, all connected." When you see connections instead of separations, center easier to hold. Is that the teaching of your people? Yes, everything circle, not line. She gestured to the stream beside them, the trees overhead and the sky beyond. Water becomes cloud, becomes rain, becomes water. Tree grows from seed, gives seed, dies, feeds new trees. Nothing truly ends. Nothing truly separates. Her philosophy resonated with Ethan in ways he hadn't expected. Since his father's death, he had viewed his life as a linear progression towards solitary old age and eventual oblivion. The idea of existence as a circle, a continuous flow of connection and renewal offered a perspective he had never considered. And us, he asked, voicing the question that had been forming in his mind since that moment by the sacred pools. Where do we fit in this circle? Nayeli's expression softened. Water brought you to us 5 winters ago, marked you, connected you, then took you away again. Her eyes held his. Now water brings you back, not accident, part of circle. And when this is over, when Reed is stopped and your people are safe, circle continues, she replied simply. Your path, my path separate but connected, like streams that join then part then meet again in great river. There was wisdom in her words, but also an openness to possibility that Ethan found both frightening and exhilarating. For 5 years, he had chosen isolation, believing it safer than risking the pain of connection and loss. Now life had thrust him back into the foe of human relationship, challenging him to embrace the circular nature of existence rather than clinging to the illusion of linear control. Before he could respond, a bird call echoed through the trees, the distinctive cry of a hawk that served as the tribe's signal. Nayeli tensed, listening intently as the call was repeated. Kiona, she identified. Warning. They mounted quickly, approaching the valley with heightened caution. At the ridge overlooking the sacred pools, they found Kiona waiting, bow in hand, her expression grave. Reed men come, she reported in her limited English. Many, with guns. Nayeli spoke rapidly in their native tongue, presumably relaying the news about the delayed military action. Kiona's response was equally fast, her gestures indicating urgency. What's happening? Ethan asked when they paused. Reed brings all men from mining camp, Nayeli translated. Maybe 50 with many guns. Daniel thinks Reed learned about military delay, decided to take Valley himself before soldiers come. When? Soon. You mean before sunset? Nayeli's expression was determined rather than fearful. Mother-gathering tribe now, must prepare. They descended into the valley, finding it transformed from the peaceful sanctuary of the previous day. The tribe had mobilized for defense warriors positioned at strategic points. Women and children moved to caves higher in the surrounding hills, elders gathering at the sacred pools where Makawi directed preparations. Daniel met them near the lake, his expression relieved. Thank God you're back. Reed's men were spotted 2 hours ago moving up the northern trail. They'll reach the valley entrance by late afternoon. How many? Ethan asked. At least 40 armed men. They brought wagons too loaded with supplies for an extended occupation. The implications were clear. Reed intended to seize the valley by force and establish his claim through possession, military orders, or legal injunctions notwithstanding. What about Reverend Sullivan? Ethan asked. Is he with them? Daniel's expression darkened. Yes, but not willingly. They're using him as a hostage, apparently, to prevent his brother in the territorial government from turning against Reed if things go wrong. This confirmed Ethan's fears for the Reverend. It also suggested that Reed's partnership with Thomas Sullivan might be less voluntary than they had assumed. We need to get the tribe to safety, Ethan decided. There are too many armed men for us to fight directly. Tribe will not leave sacred land, Nigeli stated firmly. Not again. Then we need another strategy, Ethan acknowledged, something that uses Reed's numbers against him. Makawi approached her dignified presence, drawing their attention. She spoke directly to Ethan with Nayeli translating. Mother says Reed men cannot see sacred pools since ceremony. Can see valley, can see people, but water appears ordinary to them. This gives advantage. The concealment ceremony, Ethan recalled. It hides the true nature of the sacred water. Yes, Nayeli confirmed. They seek what they cannot recognize, even standing beside it. An idea began to form in Ethan's mind, a strategy that might turn Reed's greed and ignorance against him. If they can't recognize the sacred pools, we can lead them away from them. Make them believe the real source is elsewhere. Daniel caught on quickly. A diversion. Draw their attention to another part of the valley while the tribe protects the true sacred site. Exactly, Ethan agreed, but it will require perfect timing and coordination. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finalized their plan. The tribe would create the appearance of defending a small spring on the valley's eastern edge, far from the true sacred pools. Ethan, Daniel, and several warriors would position themselves to intercept Reed's men, directing their attention to this false objective. Meanwhile, Makawi, Nayeli, and the other tribal leaders would remain at the true sacred pools, ready to perform another ceremony of concealment, if necessary. Kiona and Ayana would lead a group to attempt Reverend Sullivan's rescue during the confusion. It's a risky plan, Daniel observed as they made final preparations. If Reed doesn't take the bait, he will, Ethan said with certainty. Reed sees what he expects to see. He expects resistance at the sacred spring, so that's what we'll show him. As the sun touched the western ridge, casting long shadows across the valley, the sentries signaled. Reed's men had arrived at the northern entrance to the valley and were beginning their advance. It begins, Nayeli said quietly, standing beside Ethan at their observation point. Circle turns again. Ethan nodded, feeling strangely calm despite the danger ahead. Whatever happens, he told her. I'm grateful that the flood brought me to your people 5 years ago. Grateful for the second chance at life and at living. She regarded him with those ancient, knowing eyes that had first captured his attention at the auction. Water knows, she said simply. Water remembers. Water connects. With those words, she touched her hand to his scarred forearm, then turned to join her mother at the sacred pools. Ethan watched her go, feeling the mark on his arm tingle in response to her touch, a reminder of the mysterious bond that had brought him from isolation back into the flow of life's great circle. Then he shouldered his rifle and moved to his position, ready to face whatever the turning circle might bring.